once we succeed for a government to ignore this voice, it will be powerful. When the people of Australia mandate that this First Nations voice must exist beyond the political cycles, because that's the goal here, is to set up a mechanism that actually exists despite the government of the day, and that's mandated by the people. So it is going to be, this is why we've had the fight for years, because they know how powerful this will be, and that's why we're asking you to walk with us. We need the 97% to apply that political pressure.
The people who stand with me on this stage, I regard as giants.
Thomas Mayo.
Thomas Mayo written a handbook called the Voice to Parliament Handbook. All the detail you need.
Thomas Mayo is a signatory to the Uluru Statement from the Heart, but was also entrusted with the physical document.
Mayo is part of the referendum working group.
He spent 18 months travelling around Australia to garner support for an Indigenous voice to Parliament.
And I tell you what, we are sick of governments not listening to our voice. We are going to use the rule book of the nation to force them.
There is nothing more powerful than building a First Nations voice, a black institution, a black political force to be reckoned with.
Keep going until we change the system, until we tear down the institutions that harm our people.
And also to pay respects to the elders of the Communist Party, who I think, without a doubt, have played a very important role in our activism.
You know, this is the first step. It's a vital step. Pay the rent, for example. You know, how do we do that in a way that is transparent and that it actually sees reparations and compensation to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people?
The power in the voice is that it creates the ability for First Nations to go forth with coherent positions on what legislation needs to be created, what legislation needs to be amended, and punish politicians that ignore our advice.
Testing. And good afternoon, good evening, and good night, and welcome to today's episode of Law, News and Laughter. It's our Voice to Parliament special. That's right, people. If you're interested in US politics, anything else going on in the world, I'll see you tomorrow. Today, you may notice I'm a little bit more dressed up. That's because this one is reasonably important. We're going to be looking at the history, the treaties, the paperwork, really, between the First Nations and the Australian colonisers. We're going to look at exactly how we've gotten to this point and why, at some point between October and December this year, we will be going to the polls to decide whether or not there should be a constitutionally enshrined racial divide. That's my own personal opinion, but I'm going to try and do this as unbiased and as fair and equitable as possible. We're going to be looking at both sides of the debate. News articles from the left, news articles from the right, news articles from the yes, and news articles from the no. Following that, we're going to watch Linda Burney's National Press Club address. In the offshot chance that that decides to tick off YouTube, because it is on YouTube, we will shift it over to Rumble so we can finish playing through that. But in the meantime, people, let's get stuck into it, shall we? Welcome to Law, News, and, well, not so much laughter today, but Law, News and Laughter. Okay, won't be a second just getting myself all set up here, because it actually takes a lot of effort to get those videos to play and stuff right at the start. So, what I'm going to start with is we're going to go through a brief history of, well, Australia, really, at least between the white man and the First Nation. I'm going to try not to be racist throughout this, but, you know me. So, what I'm starting with is the Working with Indigenous Australians page, which has been a remarkable resource. I'm not going to lie. It's designed for people working in human resources, working in the government. Chicken Little, the racist chook, coming through with a $50 super chat. None of the architects, from the perpetually drunk Linda Burney to the communist revolutionary Thomas Mayo, can agree what the voice can and can't do. Incidentally, is not Linda Burney, the Minister for Indigenous Australians, already the voice? Not going to disagree with you on that, Chicken Little. Simple fact of the matter is, that's part of the no argument, is that they already have a voice, quite literally through their own minister on the executive, what do you call it? The part of the executive council. That's not strictly the actual name, but yes, there you go. Anyway, we'll quickly run through the history, then we're going to look at both sides of the yes and no, why there are Aboriginals that are saying that they want to vote no, both because they don't think it'll do anything, and others saying no because they don't believe that it goes far enough. I'm going to try and steer clear of Lydia Thorpe as much as possible today. Just a little bit over it, and as bad as it sounds, despite the fact that she tries to insert herself into everything, I kind of feel like this needs to be irrespective of her. So, anyway, let's get started. Okay. So, history. They've done a really good job putting this down. I'm going to quickly run through it because it starts right back 60,000 odd years ago. Some of it's contested, some of it's not. I'm just going to go through basically the information that they have provided so that I can give what would effectively be, for lack of a better term, the governmental viewpoint on it, shall we say. Okay, so 60,000 plus years through to 1788. Aboriginal people have been in Australia for about 50 to 120,000 years. Again, that's up for debate. Although I think that, like, the world's oldest human skeletons or something have been... Well, no, the Cradle of Life in Africa has those, so... here we go, already talking out my ass, here we go. They were a hunter-gatherer people who had adapted well to the environment. Okay, this website is not scroll-friendly. There were between 300,000 and 950,000 Aboriginal people living in Australia when the British arrived in 1788. At the time, there were approximately 260 distinct language groups and 500 dialects. Aboriginal people lived in small family groups and were semi-nomadic, with each family group living in a defined territory, systematically moving across a defined area following seasonal changes. Groups had their own distinct history and culture. At certain times, family groups would come together for social and ceremonial and trade purposes. It is estimated that up to 500 people gathered at any one time. Membership within each family or language group was based on birthright, shared language, and cultural obligations and responsibilities. Relationships within the groups predetermined categories of responsibilities and obligations to the group and to the family. Aboriginal people built semi-permanent dwellings. As a nomadic society, emphasis was on relationships to family and group and country rather than development of an agrarian society. Being semi-nomadic meant that Aboriginal people were also relatively non-materialistic. Greater emphasis was placed on the social, religious, and spiritual activities. The environment was controlled by spirit rather than physical means, and religion was deeply tied to the country. According to Aboriginal beliefs, the physical environment of each local area was created and shaped by the actions of spiritual ancestors who travelled across the landscape. Living and non-living things existed as a consequence of the actions of the dreaming ancestors. Helen Milroy speaks about the importance of the land as part of the dreaming. We are part of the dreaming. We have been in the dreaming for a long time, before we were born on this earth, and we will return to its vast landscape at the end of our days. It provides for us during our time on earth a place to heal, a place to repurpose and hope, and to continue our destiny. Land is fundamental to the Indigenous people, both individually and collectively. Concepts of Indigenous land ownership were and are different from the European legal systems. Boundaries were fixed and validated by the dreaming creation stories. Each individual belonged to certain territories within the family group and had spiritual connections and obligations to a particular area of the country. Hence, land was not owned, one belonged to the land. Aboriginal people experienced the land as a richly symbolic and spiritual landscape rather than a merely physical environment. Religion was based on a philosophy of oneness with the natural environment. Both men and women were involved in the spiritual life of the group. While men had been acknowledged as having an overarching responsibility for the spiritual activities of the group, past scholars studying Aboriginal cultures have neglected women's roles. Women's roles in the traditional context, how they were disrupted during colonisation, and the misrepresentation of these roles has become an important issue. What the... Of course. I've put my phone somewhere and I have no idea where it is. I'm going to clip this part out because I'm going to be right back. Bloody hell. Where's it gone? today. I wanted to do this so respectfully and all that sort of stuff, and managed to stuff up the opening, managed to do this. Anyway, this is all getting cut out. Okay. Aboriginal social, cultural and historical context. The social and economic organisation of Aboriginal groups vary greatly throughout Australia, but some general observations can be made. Aboriginal society had a relatively egalitarian social structure, where age, gender, totemic and land affiliations were important demarcations. Women usually provided the stable food supply, and they owned and had special responsibilities towards sites in the landscape, associated song cycles and dreaming stories. They had exclusive control over the secret ceremonies of reproduction, and their maternal function as child rearers was highly valued. Men hunted and played an important role in nurturing and teaching the children, and there were special responsibilities for a wide network of kin in relation to each child. When a baby was born, he or she was immediately had a niche in a complex cosmology defined by the dreaming stories. Identity was secure, and the child had a variety of land relationships via its conception dreaming, as well as inheritance through its father and mother. The child would gradually be introduced to responsibilities towards land and kin, and strict marriage rules. Values were taught in a traditional Aboriginal society, including sharing, respecting the wisdom of age, looking out for the young, gentle treatment and close observation of plants and animals, and the fulfillment of kinship obligations. Families and clans travelled the land throughout the year. They harvested the land's resources when the opportunity was available and looked for special sites to which they had responsibility. Men and women separately facilitated the reproduction of resources through ritual nurturing. They also spent time working or negotiating business with the company of their own gender. Decision-making and law enforcement were divided between the men and women. And ultimate power was often accorded on the basis of custodial obligations towards relevant land or kinship obligations. The tablet of law, which was ensconced in the landscape itself, was explained through dreaming stories as people travelled. While women were in charge of their own business, sacred and secular's men's power often appeared to be more highly valued in regard to law and punishment, matters concerning the larger group. In some areas, women's law was more powerful than others, and older women held higher status. Gatherings of many clans took place from time to time to conduct social, marriage and religious business. Ritual confrontations were also staged to avenge wrongdoing, and other transgressions could be punished physically or through potentially fatal sorcery. Dancing and singing, storytelling, drawing and painting, and sculpture took place all year round, and through such entertaining means, everyone learnt the law of their group. So that's roughly how they were going through life for, 60-odd thousand years through till 1788. Then you hit 1788, and we wind up in the colonisation. Initial invasion and colonisation. The arrival of Lieutenant James Cook and then Arthur Phillip in 1788 marked the beginning of white settlement. From 1788, Australia was treated by the British as a colony of settlement, not of conquest. Aboriginal land was taken over by British colonists on the premise that it belonged to no man, hence the term terra nullius, which was overturned. The history of Aboriginal disposition is central to the understanding of contemporary Aboriginal and non-Aboriginal relations. Colonial takeover was premised on the assumption that European culture was superior to all others, and that Europeans could define the world in their terms. A colony could be established by persuading the indigenous inhabitants to submit themselves to the overlordship, by purchasing from those inhabitants the right to settle as part of it, by unilateral possession on the basis of first discovery and effective occupation. Possession of Australia was declared on the basis of unilateral possession. The land was defined as terra nullius or wasteland because Cook and Banks considered that there were few natives along the coast. They apparently deduced that there would be fewer or none inland. Their observations were soon proven incorrect. The governors of the first settlements soon found that the Aboriginal people lived inland and had special territories and associations with land on a spiritual and inheritance basis. Nonetheless, they did not amend the terms of the British sovereignty. In the first 100 years, there was no consensus on the basis of British sovereignty. Deaths in custody as Australia's colonisation resulted in a dramatic decline in the Aboriginal population. Estimates of how many Indigenous people lived in Australia at the time vary from 300,000 to 1 million. Estimates of the number of Indigenous who died in frontier conflict is also varies widely. While the exact number of Indigenous deaths is not known, many Indigenous men, women and children died of introduced diseases to which they had no resistance, such as smallpox, influenza, that's right, the common cold, and measles. Many also died in random killings, punitive expeditions, and organised massacres. Okay, so from the 1890s through to the 1950s, Indigenous survivors of frontier conflict were moved onto reserves or missions. From the end of the 19th century, various state and territory laws were put into place to control relations between Aboriginal people and other Australians. Under these laws, protectors, protection boards, and native affairs departments segregated and controlled a large part of the Aboriginal population. It is estimated that the Aboriginal population during the 1920s had fallen to only about 60,000, from perhaps 300,000 or even 1 million in 1788. In June 1883, the Aborigines Protection Board was established. The board consisted of 5 men controlling the lives of 9,000 or so full-blood or part Aboriginal people who lived in New South Wales. More reserves or stations were set up by 1900, where there were 133 of them. Maloga and Warringesta were taken over by the board, and the people of Maloga subsequently moved to Kamaranganja. Make your jokes at home, people. Missionaries were allowed to live on the reserves. In 1909, the New South Wales Aborigines Protection Act was passed. This was the main legislation governing the lives of the Aboriginal people for the next 60 years or so, although it was amended many times according to changing government policies. The Act provided for all reserves and stations and all buildings to be vested in the board. The board had the power to move Aboriginal people out of towns, set up managers, local committees, and local guardians, the police, for the reserves, to control the reserves, to prevent liquor from being sold to Aborigines, and to stop whites from associating with Aboriginals or entering onto the reserves. Amendments to the Act from 1915 to 1918 allowed the board to remove children from their parents for training and to force half-castes to leave the reserves. Young girls were sent to the Cootamundra Girls' Home to train as domestic servants, and the boys to Singleton to train for service on farms. Kinchela Boys' Home at Kempsey was established in 1924. The children in these institutions received almost no education and their labour was exploited. The effects on Aboriginal family life were devastating. From the 1920s, the policy became one of enforced assimilation for part Aboriginals, as the board tried to reduce the number of people on the reserves. In the 1930s, people shifted from one reserve to another, so that some reserves could be closed and the land leased to neighbouring white farmers, as happened in Tumbura, Angledool and Karowa Tank. The Aboriginal Welfare Board replaced the Aborigines Protection Board in 1940, but continued under a new policy of assimilation to close reserves and encourage people to move to town. In 1967, a joint committee of the two houses of the state parliament strongly endorsed these policies. The committee also recommended that in due course all Aboriginal reserves should disappear. Such decisions totally demoralised the people still living on the reserves, who had come to regard them as homelands. The subsequent official neglect of these properties led to accounts of poor conditions suffered by many Aboriginal people now living on former reserves. During the 1920s, people began to lobby for the abolition of the Aborigines Protection Board in favour of a board with all Aboriginal membership. Several organisations were formed and were active throughout the 1920s, 30s and 40s. The Australian Aborigines Progression Association, the Australian Aborigines League and the Aborigines Progressive Association. These organisations also fought for national citizenship of Aboriginals and full equality of other citizens. Some people also wanted a representative to the Commonwealth Parliament. Those involved in these activities in the 1930s came from all parts of New South Wales and Victoria. Among them were William Cooper, Bill Ferguson, Margaret Tucker and Douglas Nichols. Jack and Selina Patton, Tom Foster, Pearl Gibbs, Jack Chinchilla and Helen Grosvenor from Redfern. In 1937, with the 50th anniversary of British settlement 150th. It's got to be 150th. With the 150th anniversary of British settlement looming, Bill Ferguson, inspired by Will Cooper, called for the founding meeting of the Aborigines Progressive Association and set about organising a conference in Sydney for 26th of January 1938. It was called a Day of Mourning and Protest. About 1,000 Aboriginal men and women attended. Before the meeting, a pamphlet, Aborigines Claim Citizens' Rights, was written by Patton and Ferguson. The meeting was the culmination of 10 years' work by the New South Wales Aboriginals against the policies of the Aborigines Protection Board. There's the pamphlet. The following week, on 31 January 1938, a deputation of about 20 people presented the Prime Minister, Joseph Lyons, with a proposed national policy for Aboriginals. They wanted the Commonwealth control of all Aboriginal They wanted Commonwealth control of all Aboriginal matters with a separate Ministry of Aboriginal Affairs, an administration advised by a board of 6, at least 3 of whom were to be Aboriginals nominated by the Aboriginals Progressive Association, and full citizen status for all Aboriginals and civil equality for white Australians, including equality in education, labour laws, workers' compensation, pensions, land ownership and wages. Lyon replied that under the Constitution, the Commonwealth control was not possible. These protests prompted the state government to set up the New South Wales Parliamentary Select Committee of 1937 and the Public Service Board investigation of 1938 to look at mismanagement and conditions on the reserves. Unfortunately, very little resulted from these investigations. Aboriginal action continued. In February 1939, people at the Cummeragunja went on strike. They left the reserve and camped outside on the other side of the Murray River in Victoria. Protest meetings were held in the Domain in Sydney. The movement for citizen rights continued in the 1960s. During the Freedom Rides of 1965, students and Aboriginals protested against discrimination in certain New South Wales towns. In 1937, the Commonwealth Government held a national conference on Aboriginal affairs which agreed that Aboriginal people not of full blood should be absorbed or assimilated into the wider population. The aim of the assimilation was to make the Aboriginal problem gradually disappear so that Aboriginal people would lose their identity and the wider community. Yeah, that's not a great time in history. Let's be honest. For anyone that saw Rabbit Proof Fence, it was literally government policy to breed Aboriginals with whites, then breed their children with more whites, and eventually breed out the Aboriginal. Yes. Protection and assimilation policies which impacted harshly on Indigenous people included separate education for Aboriginal children, town curfews, alcohol bans, no social security, lower wages, state guardianship of all Aboriginal children, and laws that segregated Indigenous people into separate living areas, mainly on special reserves outside towns or in remote areas. Another major feature of the assimilation policy was stepping up the forcible removal of Indigenous children from their families and their placement in white institutions or foster homes. 1967 saw the Commonwealth referendum and Aboriginal peoples were granted a right of citizenship. The federal Labor government, led by Golf Whitlam at the time, adopted the policy of self-determination for Indigenous communities in 1972. The policy was described as Aboriginal communities deciding the pace and nature of their future development as significant components in a diverse Australia. It recognised that Aboriginal people had a right to be involved in decision-making about their own lives. The federal coalition government led by Malcolm Fraser, which came into power in 1975, adopted a policy of self-management which focused on Indigenous communities managing the government policies and funding locally, but with little say in what the projects would be created. The Hawke and Keating Labor governments from 83 through to 96 used both self-determination and self-management as key principles for their Indigenous affairs policies, and Keating began the reconciliation movement in 1991. So, reconciliation on a national level. Reconciliation is about unity and respect between Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders and non-Indigenous Australians. It is about respect for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander heritage and valuing justice and equity for all Australians. Respect and justice have personal, family and community implications, practical and structural implications, local and state and national implications. Progress towards reconciliation has been slow. There was a Royal Commission into Aboriginal Deaths in Custody in 1991. The final recommendation of the Royal Commission into Aboriginal Deaths in Custody was a formal process of reconciliation between Indigenous and other Australians. In response to the Commonwealth Government, established a Council for Aboriginal Reconciliation. It was established in 1991 with the unanimous support of the Parliament. The Council's charter was to raise public awareness and consult on a document of reconciliation within a 10-year legislative period. Paul Keating made a speech on 10 December 1992. In February 1995, the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Commission report Recognition, Rights and Reform said constitutional reform was a priority. The report, which was endorsed by the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Commission, at its 33rd meeting held in Canberra, said consultations across the country had found overwhelming support for recognition of Indigenous Australians in the Constitution. Report of the National Inquiry into separation of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander children from their families was completed by the Human Rights and Equal Opportunity Commission in 1997. In 1998, the Constitution Convention held at Old Parliament House from February 2 to 13 had a debate on proposals as to whether or not Australia should become a republic, which supported Indigenous recognition in the new preamble. May 28, 2000, the Council for Aboriginal Reconciliation's Roadmap to Reconciliation agenda, presented at the Corroboree 2000, called on the Federal Parliament to initiate and support a referendum to deal with sections 25 and 51(26) and add recognition of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples to the Constitution. More than 250,000 people walk across Sydney Harbour Bridge in support of Indigenous Australians. The Northern Territory National Emergency Response, also referred to as the Intervention, was a package of changes to welfare, law enforcement, land tenure and other measures introduced by the Australian Federal Government under John Howard in 2007 to address allegations of rampant child sexual abuse and neglect in Northern Territory Aboriginal communities. Significant human rights concerns were raised by the particular approach adopted by the government. In October 2007, Prime Minister John Howard makes a re-election pledge to hold a referendum on constitutional recognition for Indigenous Australians. Kevin Rudd, as opposition leader, follows by promising bipartisan support for the proposal regardless of the election outcome. In February 2008, then Prime Minister Kevin Rudd delivered an apology in federal parliament for the mistreatment of Indigenous Australians. In the speech, he committed to closing the gap on Indigenous disadvantage and made a statement of recognition that today we honour the Indigenous peoples of this land, the oldest continuing cultures in human history. In 2008, the Council of Australian Governments agreed to 6 ambitious targets to address the disadvantage faced by Indigenous Australians in life expectancy, child mortality, education and employment. They were to close the gap in the life expectancy within a generation, halve the gap in mortality rates for Indigenous children under 5 by 2018, ensure access to early childhood education for all Indigenous 4-year-olds in remote communities, halve the gap in reading, writing and numeracy achievements for children by 2018, and halve the gap for Indigenous students in Year 12 or equivalent by 2020. And finally, to halve the gap in employment outcomes between Indigenous and other Australians by 2018. In January 2012, the Expert Panel on Constitutional Recognition of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Peoples presents its report to the Gillard government. In 2013, Prime Minister Julia Gillard and Opposition Leader Tony Abbott addressed the Parliament in support of the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders Peoples Recognition Bill. At that time, Ms Gillard said, "We must never feel guilt for the things already done in this nation's history, but we can and must feel responsibility for the things that remain undone. No gesture speaks more deeply to the healing of our nation's fabric than amending our nation's founding charter. We are bound to each other in this land and always will be. Let us be bound in justice and dignity as well." In 2015, Liberal MP Ken Wyatt tabled a report with support from the government, Labor and the Greens on progress towards a referendum on Indigenous recognition in the Constitution. Political and Indigenous leaders plotted a path to referendum. In July 2015, Prime Minister Tony Abbott and Opposition Leader Bill Shorten hosted an unprecedented joint summit with about 40 of the nation's most influential Indigenous representatives on the path towards a referendum. The Referendum Council, the 16-member Referendum Council, was jointly appointed by then Prime Minister Malcolm Turnbull and the Leader of the Opposition, Bill Shorten, on December 7th, 2015. The advice was the council was to advise the government on steps towards a referendum to recognise Australian and Torres Strait Islander peoples in the Constitution. The council was made up of Indigenous and non-Indigenous community leaders and co-chaired by Patrick Dodson and Mark Liebler. Patrick Dodson resigned from the council on 2nd of March 2016 after being endorsed by the Labor Party for a vacant West Australian Senate seat and was replaced by Pat Anderson, Order of Australia. Over a 6-month period, the council travelled to 12 different locations around Australia and met with 1,200 Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander representatives. The meetings resulted in a consensus document on constitutional recognition, the Uluru Statement from the Heart. The First Nations Constitutional Convention met over 4 days from May 23 to 26 in 2017. Council member Megan Davis gave the first public reading of the Statement from the Heart at the conclusion of the 2017 First Nations National Convention. Actually, I should have opened that too. Okay, the Statement from the Heart. So this is the document that was provided. Hang on, where's the background? I might as well do it properly. The 16-member referendum council was jointly appointed by Malcolm Turnbull and the leader of the opposition, Bill Shorten, in December 2015. The council was to advise the government on steps towards a referendum to recognise Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples in the Constitution. The council was made up of Indigenous and non-Indigenous leaders. That's exactly the same on the last page. Over a 6-month period, the council travelled. Again, they've just copied and pasted. First Nations met. Yep, got that. Okay. The convention was adopted by 250 Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander delegates. Okay, they really didn't give much background there at all. So, in 2017, the Uluru Statement from the Heart was given by the federal government. We gathered at the 2017 National Constitutional Convention, coming from all points of the southern sky, to make this statement from the heart. Our Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander tribes... Sorry, it was given to the federal government. Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander tribes were the first sovereign nations of the Australian continent and its adjacent islands, and possessed it under our own laws and customs. This our ancestors did according to the reckoning of our culture, from the creation according to the common law from time immemorial, and according to science more than 60,000 years ago. This sovereignty is a spiritual notion, the ancestral tie between the land and Mother Nature, and the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples who were born therefrom remain attached thereto, and must one day return thither to be united with our ancestors. This link is the basis of the ownership of the soil, or better, of sovereignty, and it has never been ceded or extinguished, and coexists with the sovereignty of the Crown. How could it be otherwise? That peoples possessed a land for 60 millennia, and this sacred link disappears from the world merely in the last 200 years. With substantive constitutional change and structural reform, we believe this ancient sovereignty can shine through as a fuller expression of Australia's nationhood. Proportionally, we are the most incarcerated people on the planet. We are not an innately criminal people. Our children are aliened from our families at unprecedented rates. This cannot be because we have no love for them, and our youth languish in detention in obscene numbers. They should be our hope for the future. These dimensions from our crisis tell plenty. The structural nature of the problem, this is the torment of our powerlessness. We seek constitutional reform to empower our people and to take a rightful place in our country. When we have power over our destiny, our children will flourish. They will walk in two worlds, and their culture will be a gift to their country. We call for the establishment of a First Nations voice enshrined in the Constitution. Marikata is the culmination of our agenda, the coming together after a struggle. It captures, our aspirations for a fair and truthful relationship with the people of Australia, and a better future for our children based on justice and self-determination. We seek a Marikata Commission to supervise a process of agreement making between governments and the First Nations, and truth-telling about our history. In 1967, we were counted. In 2017, we seek to be heard. We leave our base camp and start our trek across this vast country. We invite you to walk with us in a moment of the Australian people for a better future. So that pretty well brings us up to date. So, what are we on about today? Well, today we're here because the culmination of all that was a couple of report documents over the last, 3 or 4 years. And now the Australian federal government, under Anthony Albanese, has passed a bill to put it to a referendum. Here in Australia, the only way that you can alter the Constitution is obviously through a referendum, which means not only do the majority of people need to vote for it, the majority of states at their own level need to also. So, let's do this. As part of the Australian government's commitment to implementing the Uluru Statement from the Heart, which I just read, a referendum will be held between October and December 2023 to recognise the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples in the Constitution by establishing an Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander voice. On 23 March 2023, the Prime Minister, the Honourable Anthony Albanese, honourable is a stretch, but anyway, announced the constitutional amendment and question that will be put to the Australian people at a referendum later this year. The amendment and question was developed in consultation with the First Nations Referendum Working Group. The proposed constitutional amendment was introduced into Parliament through an alteration bill on the 30th of March. The bill was referred to the Joint Select Committee on the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Voice referendum, which heard from 70 witnesses and published 270 submissions. It published its report on 12 May 2023, recommending that Parliament pass the bill without amendment. The Parliament passed the constitutional alteration bill on Monday, 19 June 2023. This means that the referendum question and proposed amendment to the Constitution are now set. The passage of the bill means that the referendum can be held by the end of the year. At the referendum, Australians will be asked whether to alter the Constitution to recognise the First Peoples of Australia by establishing an Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander voice. The bill proposes to add a new Chapter 9, recognition of the Torres Strait Islander peoples, at the end of the Constitution. So, the statement from the heart lasted about as long as a fart before they reneged on that statement, from what I can see. Anyway, so what actually is the referendum question? The question to be put to the Australian people at the 2023 referendum will be a proposed law to alter the Constitution to recognise the First Peoples of Australia by establishing an Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander voice. Do you approve this proposed alteration? Now, setting aside the fact that I find that this particular question itself is inherently racist and is going to cause all sorts of issues and mainly get votes of people that don't want to be seen as racist, it's also very broad. But then again, referendum questions always are. The trouble that I have is that I do not believe that on the day, the proposed change to legislation is going to be provided to anyone that is voting. That's the issue that I have. Because whilst you read that as a fairly open, innocuous sentence, a proposed law to alter the Constitution to recognise the First Peoples of Australia by establishing an Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander voice. Setting aside the fact that that question of itself is inherently racist because it basically says, do you think that one particular racial demographic should be recognised in our Constitution? Which is basically the way that the question should be asked. My issues are mostly with the wording of the proposed legislation. Set aside the fact that I don't believe that any racial demographic should have any sort of bias or such divisive power in any sort of circumstance. Damn it, I was supposed to stay unbiased. The major issue that I have really is that I think that the actual legislation is going to be buried. Unless they're handing out pamphlets to say, here, this is what it's going to say, then people aren't going to know what they're voting on. And both sides of the divide are basically cannot, at the moment, actually come to some sort of consensus as to what the voice will actually be able to do. And we're going to run through that a little bit. So, the actual constitutional amendment that would be run through the Parliament if everyone votes yes on that particular innocuous question. The proposed law that Australians are asking to approve in the referendum would insert a new section into the Constitution. Chapter 9, recognition of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. In recognition of the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples as the First Peoples of Australia, there shall be a body called the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Voice. The Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Voice may make representations to the Parliament and the Executive Government on the Commonwealth, on matters relating to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples. The Parliament shall, subject to this Constitution, have power to make laws with respect to the matters relating to the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander voice, including its composition, functions, powers, and procedures. So, again, I wouldn't have an issue if it was just items 1 and 2. Yes, they were here before everybody else. Yes, they should have a voice. But then again, they should have a representative voice, the same as everybody else. It's part 3. Subject to this Constitution, the Parliament, so the government of the day, shall have the power to make laws with respect to matters relating to the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander voice, including its composition, functions, powers, and procedures. Okay. Before I get into exactly what that would mean, let's have a look at the rest of this webpage, because then I can close it. The Prime Minister also released the principles of the Aboriginal Torres Strait Islander voice. You can read the detailed principles here. In summary, the principles are that the voice will give independent advice to the government and the Parliament. The voice will be chosen by Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people based on the wishes of the local community. The voice will be representative of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander communities, gender balanced, and include youth. The voice will be empowering, community-led, inclusive, and respectful, and culturally informed. The voice will be accountable and transparent. The voice will work alongside existing organisations and traditional structures. The voice will not have a program delivery function. The voice will not have a veto power. Well, let me put it this way. If the veto power that they were sort of espousing to begin with had been in there, I think we can safely say that this would never have really gotten off the ground. If the proposed law is approved at the referendum, there will be a process with the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander communities, the Parliament and the broader public to settle the voice design. Legislation to enable the voice will then go through the standard parliamentary process to ensure adequate scrutiny by elected representatives in both houses of Parliament. Yeah, well, independent advice, there is that. The initial legislation setting it up. But then, what's that going to look like? Because here's the problem that I have with this. You're telling me we're going to enshrine something in the Constitution. You're not telling me what it's going to be composed of. You're not telling me what it's going to actually do. But you want it to be enshrined in the founding document of our country. Oh yeah, no, we'll put it in the Constitution and then we'll sort out the details later. They would have a veto power if there's a weak government. Well, there is that too. On the 21st of May 2023, the Australian Government launched an information program to help inform Australians about the Voice referendum. The program encourages Australians to get ready for a conversation about the Voice by visiting thevoice.gov.au. There are a wide range of resources available on the website to help you learn more about the Voice, including dedicated First Nations resources, translated resources, and accessible formats such as Auslan interpreted videos. Okay. So there's that. But let's go back to this, shall we? Let's go back to the actual section that's going to be instituted in the Constitution. The Parliament, the Federal Parliament, shall, subject to this Constitution, have the power to make laws with respect to matters relating to the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander voice, including its composition, functions, powers, and procedures. This sounds like a scam just to placate them. Why not just give them the same representation as everybody else? Why do they need a voice to speak for them? They should vote. Yep, that's my personal opinion on it, is that every voice in Australia should have the exact same level of representation. And see, the irony of it is that I've only got anecdotal on this, but my own conversations with individuals in the community, some of the stuff that I've seen online, some of the stuff that I've had provided to me by certain individuals, like, half of the people that this purports to represent don't even know that it exists or that this is happening. It's really just certain loudmouths that are really pushing it, shall we say. Actually, you know what? To that end, I do have one more video to show. Wait, no, I'll wait, because it's part of the No Campaign side of things, so I'll get to that. Alright. So, the voice itself would be set up so that the Parliament could delegate powers to it and give it functions and whatnot. Let's just check exactly how broad that is. Because while they have limited it specifically to how it would affect Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders, let's look at the powers that the government of the day, because of how broad this is and how it would be enshrined in the Constitution, because of how broad this is, the things that they could enable the voice to have functions and powers about. They keep saying, oh no, it's just going to be about advice. Okay, fine. Why are the words functions and powers in there? Why would they have powers at all? Here is section 51 of the Australian Constitution as it stands. These are the powers that the federal government exclusively holds power over, and which they can delegate to anyone in the executive, and, under the wording of this amendment, can delegate to the voice in relation to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders. Trade and commerce with other countries and among the states. Taxation, but not so as to discriminate between states or parts of territories. Bounties on the production or export of goods, but such that such bounties shall be uniform throughout the Commonwealth. The borrowing of money on public credit. postal, telegraphic, telephonic, and other like services, the naval and military defence of the Commonwealth and several of the states, lighthouses, lightships, beacons and buoys, astronomical, meteorological observations, quarantine. Oh look, YouTube, I said the Q word. Fisheries in Australian waterways beyond territorial limits, census and statistics, currency, coinage, and legal tender. You can say that these are all the things that the government would actually specifically be doing by themselves, and I might sound ridiculous for saying that they'd be doing these things using the voice. Well, guess what? The legislation is that open-ended that any of these could apply. That's the issue that I have with this. They already have an entire Commonwealth Department devoted to their interests, which is funded to the tune of 30-odd billion a year. Where are we? Banking, other than state banking, insurance and other state insurance, weights and measures, bills of exchange and promissory notes, bankruptcy and insolvency, copyrights, patents and inventions of design and trademark, naturalization and aliens, foreign corporations and trading or foreign financial corporations formed within the limits of the Commonwealth, marriage, divorce, matrimonial causes, invalid and old age pensions, the provisions of maternity allowances, the service and the execution throughout the Commonwealth of civil and criminal process for the judgments of courts of the state, recognition throughout the Commonwealth of laws, the public acts, records and judicial proceedings of the states, the people of any race whom it is deemed necessary to make special laws. The people of any race for whom it is deemed necessary to make special laws. Seems to me like the power may already be in the Constitution for them to create what they want. Just saying. Immigration and emigration. The influx of criminals. External affairs. Didn't know that the Parliament could do all that. Thought that they were just funky. Yeah, no. This is all the shit that the federal government has power over. Relations with the Commonwealth and the islands of the Pacific. The acquisition of property on just terms from any state or any person for any purpose in respect of which the Parliament has power to make laws. That's a dangerous one, given that we're already talking about arguing over general law, Torrens title, and native title. I mean, if there was any sort of issue over, I don't know, a $45 million island in the middle of Sydney, or any land around a waterway that's considered to be automatically native title. Am I implying that something might go wrong with the government having overly broad powers? Not sure if I understand, but isn't the current system that they have Aboriginals... The Aboriginals are outside of the government, so they're basically a separate country with their own laws? No. Well, yes and no, I should say. So the individuals that live on native land that don't really interact with the Australian government or European settlement, shall we say, yes, that would be true, because we leave them alone. Then you've got the individuals that are trying to basically co-opt Australian society. So they receive, the US just struck down affirmative action. Not so much here in Australia. You tick a box saying that you're Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islander, you get a hell of a leg up in any number of things. Social security payments, rent assistance, education, special consideration at university, housing, all sorts of things. Okay. Where are we? Acquisition of property. That one terrifies me. If, for any reason, they were able to get a hold of that one, that's... yeah. The control of railways and respective transport for the naval and military purposes of the Commonwealth. Acquisition with the consent of the state of any railways, railway construction. Conciliation and arbitration for the prevention and settlement of industrial disputes. Matters in respect of which the Constitution makes provision until the Parliament otherwise provides. Matters referred to the Commonwealth by the Parliaments or the of any state or states, but the law shall only extend to such states. Yeah, by the way, so, for example, gun laws. They don't appear anywhere in the Constitution. After the Port Arthur massacre, all of the states referred their powers up. And that was part of the, broadening of things. Vague governmental powers, I don't see how that can go wrong. It's not like they can change their mind on exactly what it means. Affirmative action doesn't cover Native Americans. No, but that's the difference, AP. I mean, for those of you in America, imagine that it was this, okay? Take the current situation in America. Take black Americans and take the Native Americans and replace them with black Americans. And that's really the situation that we're in, because they're the two demographics that have basically combined here. So, yeah, it's a minefield to tread. I'm not going to lie. Exercised within the Commonwealth at the request or at the concurrence of the Commonwealth of the state. Any power which can be established of the Constitution be exercised only by the Parliament of the United Kingdom or the Federal Council of Australasia. Matters incidental to the execution of any power vested in the Constitution, in the Parliament or either House thereof. That one's been determined to be pretty freaking broad as well. Now, let's take some of these at face value, shall we? I mean, things like coinage, legal tender, they may decide that they want to give them the power to coin their own money. They may give them naturalization and aliens. They may decide to give them certain levels of autonomy and autonomy in relation to international trade. All of a sudden, who's to say that the West Taiwanese don't come in and enter into a treaty with them? It'd be the same as someone on a Native American reserve entering into a treaty with China, and you not being able to say a goddamn thing about it. I personally believe, and okay, so the things I want to check off here, okay, because I tried to stay as impartial as I can, and let's face it, I need to cover over my own basis so everyone knows where I'm coming from on this. I firmly believe that every individual should have the same representation. I firmly believe that nobody should receive a leg up based purely on race, basically. Their heritage. If someone receives equity and an advantage, it should be based on their individual circumstances. It shouldn't be automatic just because of the colour of your skin. It's my own personal opinion on that. Other than that, this proposed referendum is dangerous because of how vague it is. The enshrining the voice itself, okay, fine. That may not be much at all. But given that Section 3 allows the government of the day to provide whatever functions and powers it wants to the voice, and that then there would be very little scrutiny as to exactly what that voice is doing, it has it's so far out there and it's remote, but it's not outside the realm of possibility for it to be set up effectively as a shadow cabinet. Where, we want something in government done, but we don't want anyone to be able to see it, so we're going to make sure that the broad powers that we give to the voice is that we're going to have someone working in that area on a particular thing that doesn't have to be scrutinised. Now, I'm not saying that any corrupt government would use any sort of loophole to that at any point. So, but anyway. Okay. So, let's start having a look at some of this. So this is all about what's going to be put on the pamphlet, because they're sending out a piece of paper, well, papers, I assume, because it's got like 2,000 words from both sides on it. I'm curious as to what actually is going to happen here, because Thorpe was prevented from being part of it, so was Pauline Hanson, so kind of curious. Let's see what they have to say for themselves.
It comes from a law from 1912. So what had happened was that the previous referendum had failed, and both sides recognised that one of the reasons for failure was that the people just weren't well enough informed. And so the Attorney General of the day, Billy Hughes, said, well, what we're going to do is have a pamphlet where the politicians can tell people the case for and against. And this is how he described it. He said that MPs were going to put the case in a way that was impersonal, reasonable and judicial, there'd be no imputation of motives, and it would appeal to reason rather than emotions or party sentiments. And that really hasn't happened, and that's the problem.
That raises a lot of questions about how that case is made in a pamphlet and who gets to write it.
Well, that's the thing. So he was trusting the politicians of the day to be able to do that in that sort of objective way, to inform people so they can make a fully reasoned argument. But the reality was, even from the very first attempt at this failed miserably. I can give you a good example. So in 1937, the Commonwealth wanted power to make laws with respect to aviation. Right? Aviation, not put in the Constitution because no planes flying then, right, when they wrote it. But it makes sense because if each state had different laws and planes were flying at different levels when they went from one state into another, they might crash into each other. So it was an absolute no-brainer that the Commonwealth should have power in relation to aviation. But the no case in relation to this says, oh, well, if the Commonwealth had power in relation to aviation, it would destroy the railways.
We'll get there.
And that would mean all the railway workers would become unemployed, and then small towns would shut down, and prices of food would escalate because the freight prices would rise, and the state's finances would be destroyed. A massive scare campaign, and it was successful.
Isn't there a mechanism that mandates a fact check?
No, is the answer, the short answer. And so this is an interesting comparison here between Commonwealth and state. So at the Commonwealth level, is written by politicians. They can say whatever they like. The AEC has no role in vetting or checking before it goes. It just prints what they say. Whereas in New South Wales, in comparison, and admittedly there hasn't been a referendum there for a long time, but previously the system was that it was written by public servants under an obligation to do it fairly and factually, and the public servant...
I'm just going to stop it there because completely irrelevant to this though. I do think it's hilarious that they seat Lydia Thorpe right next to Pauline Hanson in the Senate. You've got arguably one of the most racist people in Parliament sat right next to one of the arguably the most race-baiting senators in Parliament. That was always going to end well.
Servants were obliged then to fact-check it with experts in the field, which they did. And interestingly, if you calculate it, referendums in New South Wales are way more successful, or have been, than those at the Commonwealth level. So it can make a difference.
A lot of these arguments don't necessarily fall in a very binary fashion. It's not a straight yes or a straight no for a lot of people. There's no, but, yes, but. And we see the same thing now in this referendum campaign.
Oh, look at that! The irony of that! Division lists.
We saw it in the Republican campaign. So how does a pamphlet then come out and decide, who gets to write it?
Yep.
Who gets to sort of be part of that committee that puts that together?
Okay, so it's the politicians who decide. So those who voted yes for the voice in the Parliament, a majority of them decide what's in the yes side, and of those who voted no, a majority of them decide what's in the no case. But of course, as we know, on the no side, there were people with disparate views. You had, Senator Thorpe, Senator Hanson, you have the opposition, all with a variety of views.
Different shades of no, basically.
Oh, absolutely. No from all different directions. So that's going to make it hard within the no case. But ultimately, it's a majority of those who voted no who get to decide what the terms are. So they can exclude
to be fair,
people.
Neither of them are in the closet about it.
And where does that leave, say, coalition members who want to vote yes?
Well, interestingly, when they did have the vote, most coalition members did vote yes for the bill, because the coalition had a policy of saying, yes, we want it put to a referendum. And so therefore they voted yes to the bill, but they had strategic people who were entitled to vote no, so that they could get a majority to control the no case. So there was a lot of tactical voting that went on there.
There's a lot of strategic work to get this across the line, isn't there? Now, you've got a little sample of what we can expect to receive in the post.
So this is what it looks like. So this was the 1999 one. This one's much thicker because, well, there were two questions, and also down the back it had a copy of the amendments to be made, and there were a lot of them for the Republic. It's going to be much smaller for this one. But the way it works is you could see one side of the page was for yes, so that was the colour green, and then the other side of the page, which is a sort of pinky colour, was for no. And you've got a choice as to how long you make your argument. So the people on the yes side decided that they would be more succinct. So if you go further on through this pamphlet, you'll see that we get to a point where there's nothing on the yes side because they've finished. They figure people aren't going to read all that much. But the no case, we're still going. And you can see most of it is just slogans. Slogans that rhyme. So no gain, only pain, vote no to this republic. And, you know, don't no, vote no. And every single slogan you can rhyme was basically in there.
No, look, and don't no, vote no is entirely applicable to every referendum and vote. At no point should you ever vote on anything that you do not have any sort of idea on. And that's really what I'm concerned about, is that the legislation itself is not going to be put to people. They're going to see that question and say, oh, well, if I don't vote yes on this, I'm going to be racist. And people are going to think I'm racist. And they're not going to understand the implications of it. They're not going to understand the actual implications of that legislation. The legislation itself did not have to include Clause 3. That's my major issue with this. I'm not going to lie. Despite the fact that I believe that everyone should have equal representation, no one should be held above anybody else, if Item 3 were not part of that proposed amendment, I probably wouldn't be anywhere near as vocal about this as I have been. Trying to control the no vote to try and get it yes. Yep. What the fuck does trans have to do with that?
How much support is there for a mechanism like this, a pamphlet delivered to every mailbox in Australia? I don't imagine it's cheap.
It's expensive, and there was a parliamentary committee that looked at this some time ago and got a lot of evidence from people who complained about it. It's not the way people, you know, get their information these days. It's very old-fashioned, although for some it's still probably important. It is expensive. It goes to every voter. The main problem, of course, is that it is emotive. It's there to manipulate you. It's not necessarily going to inform you. So
no shit, you think?
The federal government decided prior to this referendum that they get rid of this pamphlet and instead do some kind of neutral campaign. But as part of the deal to get their legislation through, they had to concede and bring back the pamphlet. So the pamphlet's coming back. It'll be interesting to see.
Yeah, by the way, the federal government didn't want it neutral. You've got to remember, the federal government are the ones pushing this and that passed the legislation fairly without opposition, really, because, you know, the Conservatives wanted it to go to a referendum so that it can get slapped down. The leftists wanted to go through so they can virtue signal. I was not impressed when they came back saying, oh, by the way, yeah, exactly. Albanese has not done a neutral campaign, and we're going to get to that in a minute.
See what's in it. I mean, to be fair, the leader of the National Party has said quite clearly that he won't stand for anything in the no case that's not, correct or that's misleading. And we hope that's the case. But history tells us that, both the yes side and the no case side from time to time have put in some rather extraordinary things. So you have to take it with a bit of a grain of salt.
Either way, we'll end up with an artefact to bring back with you for another chat.
Indeed. I do keep a collection of all of these.
So there you go. Now, before I move on to what is... yes, no, maybe, I don't know. Can we repeat the question? Fuck no. Damn it. One other news article cropped up while I was looking through all this to decide what to do for the yes and the no. And technically, I'd class this as neutral from the signs of it. But why the fuck is Zuckerberg getting involved in this? Meta has vowed to crack down on abuse and misinformation surrounding the Voice to Parliament referendum. Facebook and Instagram want to be contributing to democracy and not exacerbating harm surrounding the Indigenous voice to referendum, the company's Australian policy head has said. As the social media giant beefs up protections on misinformation, abuse and mental health before the national vote. This comes at an interesting time, given that Albanese, the guy that's pushing the voice, has just snuck through the misinformation bill, wherein the Australian federal government wants to be able to tell social media companies and platforms, and us Australians, what is or isn't true, what is or isn't disinformation, and to punish you for potentially saying things that they don't like. Yeah, no. Meta, the parent company of the two apps, on Monday announced it would boost funding to fact-checkers monitoring misinformation, activate global teams to locate and respond to potential threats to the referendum, including coordinated inauthentic behaviour, and form a partnership with Reach Out for mental health support to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. The company will also maintain transparency tools such as an ad library that tracks political spending. Did that really just happen? Yes, Therese, and I will be doing an entire video on it coming up next week. Because we're going to go through that bill. I am pissed the fuck off. Because they snuck it through. While all this is going on, they snuck it through. They want to shut down the No campaign? Yeah. I'll be very surprised if you see much, if anything, in terms of the No campaign on Facebook. On Monday announced, got through that. The company will also maintain transparency tools. Yeah, extra doubt. We're also coordinating with the government's Election Integrity Assurance Task Force and security agencies in the lead up to the referendum, said Mia Garlick, Meta's Director of Public Policy for Australia. We've also improved our AI so that we can more effectively detect and block fake accounts, which are often behind this activity. Meta's been preparing for this year's Voice to Parliament referendum for a long time, leaning into expertise from previous elections. In an exclusive interview with The Guardian Australia, she said Meta would tap Australian knowledge to respond to abuse and hate speech. We have hate speech advisory groups and First Nations advisory groups giving insight and advice on issues that they see on the ground. Building off of our experience with the Marriage Equality Postal Survey and elections, unfortunately when a particular group is the focus of the debate, vulnerable groups can feel more vulnerable. The Health Minister, Mark Butler, has voiced concerns about the potential impacts on Indigenous people of the referendum debate. The E-Safety Commission and mental health agencies, including Beyond Blue and Black Dog, say they are already seeing increased reports about abuse and racism online. Social media experts have warned of the possibility of fake accounts or other forms of inauthentic activity being used during the referendum campaign. Liberal senators last month claimed that there was a clear risk to the Voice referendum that could be used as another vehicle to subvert Australia's democracy. In a report of the Senate committee inquiring into the referendum, Liberal members wrote that while a foreign actor may not necessarily have an interest in the referendum's result, foreign actors may be interested in exacerbating existing tensions within Australia's society as a means of undermining social cohesion and national unity, and of harming Australia's democratic institutions and processes. West Taiwan. Garlick said Meta's teams investigating inauthentic behaviour and influence operations had not detected any such attempts in Australia, but the company would continue to seek to delete fake accounts. Meta's new microblogging app Threads, its answer to Twitter, is an extension of Instagram and follows all of its platform's community standards and safety rules. The tech giant is rolling out media literacy programs with Australian Associated Press, encouraging users to check their facts and learn how to judge the veracity of online information. It will also run a safety school training session for politicians, advisory groups and charities in July with information about Meta's tools and policies. Foreign actors. Yeah. You know what had just occurred to me as well? I'm going out live on Facebook. Wonder how long the video will be up for, if it's not already down. Want to make sure that we're ready for any potential issue or concern. We know people will use the apps we provide to debate and advocate. We want to make sure that what is happening is in a way that is contributing to democracy and not causing people to feel that they're exposed to harmful content or hate speech. Interesting, because generally uncomfortable things lead to debate and are necessary. They did it in the US, why not elsewhere? When you sacrifice freedom for safety, you have neither. Leaders and groups behind the No campaign against the referendum have already had several online posts and ads flagged as false information by fact-checkers. Garlick said posts ruled to be false would have their distribution significantly reduced and be slapped with a warning label linking to a fact-check article. We want people to use tools to express themselves, connect, engage, but if you have concerns, it's easy to report the content for review or action. Yeah, I'm curious. I didn't actually have this one opened up, but I want to see. Voice No campaign deletes quote from man wrongly identified as Vincent Lingary's. Oh, okay. That's not the same thing. That's a bit different. Okay, so that's what you're going to see on Facebook and Instagram. False information reviewed by independent fact checkers. Yeah, independent. post by Mundine on Facebook and Instagram about Stewart have been covered with fact-checking warnings carrying the label false information checked by independent fact-checkers. The label is based on the RMIT fact-check and links to their articles. Oh, so it's people at RMIT. Yeah, no way in hell that university students or social professors are going to be biased or non-independent. Users are shown the fact check first and have to click to see the post for the original claim to be seen. Mundine said the No campaign was feeling very confident after Resolve poll in the 9 newspapers showed that support for the voice was declining from 58 to 53% in the month. Hello, Ministry of Truth. Your shadow appears to precede you. Basically. Alright. So, that's pretty much what I had from the what I would consider the non-biased side of things. You know, taking me out of the equation, that's the non-biased side of things. Now we're going to look at what news is being promoted by both the yes and the no campaigns. Okay, so we're going to start with this, which I'm going to move that across there, move that up to there. So, Reconciliation Australia, big proponents of the yes vote. A First Nations voice to Parliament protected by the Constitution is a key element of the Uluru Statement from the Heart. The bill to enable a referendum became law in mid-June, but we're waiting for the referendum date to be announced. They got a question. Why do we need a First Nations voice? A voice to Parliament will give Indigenous communities a route to help inform policy and legal decisions that impact their lives. Giving people a say will lead to more effective results. Yeah, because that's always happened. Embedding a voice in the Constitution would recognise the special place of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people in Australia's history, but importantly would mean that it can't be shut down by successive governments. No, but it can be potentially abused by successive governments. That's the whole point of that Section 3, is that it ebbs and flows, it sways with the government of the day. If it's actually 53%, it'll be tough to win every state. Well, there is that. The same people that can identify hate speech. Oh wow, I actually have a like on Facebook. Look at that. It's important because Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people and bodies have called for a voice for close to 100 years. So how do we get there? We need the referendum. It's a bit like an election, but instead of voting for people to be members of Parliament, Australia will be asked to answer a simple question like the one proposed with a yes or a no. For a referendum to be successful, it requires a majority of voters across the nation and a majority of voters in the majority of states, known as the double majority. The voice was proposed in the Uluru Statement from the Heart, presented to the nation 5 years ago by delegates of the First National Constitutional Convention, held over 4 days near Uluru in Central Australia. I don't think we're allowed to call it Uluru anymore. Why do we need National Indigenous Australians Agency and Minister for Indigenous Affairs then? That's a good point. What will be added? Guiding principles. I'm only skipping over this because specifically we already know this because I've already read it out. It was part of the government webpage. Yep, voice design principles is exactly identical. Do Australians want change? Reconciliation Australia's work consistently shows the public is on board when it comes to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders having a say, and that we want governments to step up too. The Australian Reconciliation Barometer, our nearly 2-year survey on attitudes to reconciliation, shows consistently strong support, stating that 80% of the general Australian population believe that the creation of a national representative Indigenous body is important. 86% of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people believe it is important. 79% of the general community believe such a body should be protected under the Constitution. And 87% of the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people believe such a body should be protected under the Constitution. Okay, 86% of Australian and Torres Strait Islander people? Yeah, fact check. Yeah. That I call complete and utter BS. It's literally... What, you travelled to every remote community in Australia and asked them? Because they're really the ones that I want to hear about. They're the ones that I think matter the most. The ones that are trying to, for lack of a better term, semi-integrate and take advantage of the society that's been created by everybody else that's come here to Australia. Yeah, I'm not really going to hold their opinions too high on that. Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people can no longer see that they have a right to their say. Their right to be heard at the highest levels of the law in the country continue to be a political football tossed by successive governments. How about you do exactly like everybody else and you vote? Vote in a representative. I mean, there's two now that I'm aware of, at least in the Senate. You got Linda Burnley and you've got Lydia Thorpe. So, okay, common myths and misbeliefs. Oh, they have a video.
Hi, I'm Shelley Rays. I'm a Jitterbug woman. I'm a partner and board member of KPMG and CEO of Arilla Indigenous Consulting.
Hang on. She's a partner at KPMG. For anyone that doesn't know, KPMG, one of the major national international accounting firms here. I'm actually not sure that it's possible to get further away from what you would consider a native Australian. She would be on at least 7 figures. In my own personal opinion. I mean, I have no idea about that, but... okay. Let's go with this. She's also very white, is she? Hang on. Huh. Yep, so this is the chick that we're listening to talk. So, okay.
When it comes to the proposition of a voice to Parliament, I feel like there's a lot of myths and misconceptions out there. Some might even say the topic is almost drowning in a tsunami of conflicted debate. And that leaves good-spirited, fair-minded people a little bit confused. Well, this piece has been developed for those people. For people who want to understand the innate value of a voice, who want to clarify the facts from the fallacies, and have their concerns addressed without judgment. What is a voice to Parliament? Well, there's a common view that Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people know their communities and cultures best, and therefore what would work and what wouldn't work in those communities. And so Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people want to take responsibility for their own future and have input into how government programs work. This proposed group of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people is called the Voice to Parliament, or The Voice. The Voice is an opportunity to make policies with Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people, rather than for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. Creating a mechanism for First Nations people to work in partnership with government is not just a symbolic act of reconciliation. It's a practical action resulting in a path where we can walk together, make decisions together, and deliver solutions together.
Okay. I'm having to stop it here or there, obviously, because, YouTube overlords have got to make sure that I'm being careful. I've actually opened up the Creator Studio at the back just to make sure that I'm not going to get yeeted. I can understand people in chat are thinking they're getting lectured to, and that is very much the feel of this. But I think that's intentional. And I'm not so sure that this is really going to sway people and basically bring about what they're intending for it to do. It seems to be very slick propaganda piece with a white lady. Well, she speaks for the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders, apparently.
So why are we including the voice into the Constitution? Well, the alternative to constitutional enshrinement would be to include the voice as legislation. However, in the past, legislation has been changed at the will of government at the time, and this has meant that important policies have been diluted, lost or changed.
Which is exactly what is still possible under the constitutional amendment. It's literally that the form, function, powers can be changed by the government of the day. That is complete BS and irrelevant. Or, literally, if they wanted to, yes, it's enshrined in the Constitution. All they would have to do is rush through legislation saying that the voice itself will be staffed by one person, and they will have no powers whatsoever.
And so enshrining the voice into the Constitution will better protect its use and its responsibilities to government. And at the same time, for the first time, it will recognise Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people in Australia's Constitution. I mentioned earlier that there's a number of misconceptions about the voice, leaving a number of people confused. So let's step through the top 8 to help you get some clarity. There is no detail on the voice. Well, this is not the case. The concept of the voice was created through hundreds of regional dialogues and consultations involving thousands of First Nations peoples and tens of thousands of non-Indigenous peoples and organisations.
So what you're saying is you interviewed 1,000 people out of a nation that is supposedly hundreds of thousands worth of people, and for the most part you're mostly listening to virtue signalling assholes that decided that they want to try and dictate what is best for the natives. Okay.
The outcome of all these efforts formed the basis of 3 reports. Each of them passed through Parliament. Now, no one expects you to read them, but these reports do provide answers to the questions that some people have about the model, including how it would function, its responsibilities, how appointments would be made, how First Nations peoples would be represented, and a whole lot more.
All of which is irrelevant because it can be changed at a whim.
A voice is a third chamber of Parliament. A voice will not have the power to initiate, reject, or pass bills, and so it does.
That is complete and utter bullshit. Yes, they won't be able to reject things. That doesn't mean they won't be able to propose them. They could easily make it so that they can put 800,000. Thank you, Chicken Little. That does not equate. They've already said that they will have the opportunity to draft legislation and propose it to the Parliament. That's disingenuous. Wait, what was that? So do the Aboriginals not have a voice? Are they not Australian citizens? Of course they are. They're all Australian citizens. They all receive Australian birthrights, all the same stuff in terms of the federal government. They all have the right to vote. They all have everything else. They have the exact same voice that I do. The exact same voice that the person down the street does.
Doesn't meet the definition of a parliamentary chamber. But
just because it does... Oh yes, it doesn't meet the definition of a parliamentary chamber. Good on ya. That was some very slick gymnastics there.
Did you know that there are many entities that already function like the voice, such as the Productivity Commission, the Australian Bureau of
Agricultural
Resources,
surprisingly, I've been trying to be very respectful on this, so I'm trying to do my best not to read.
And parliamentary committees. They all provide advice to government, yet none of these are considered to be a third chamber of Parliament.
And none of them have it written in our constitution that they can be that their form and function is dictated by the Parliament and that they can delegate whatever powers they like.
Not all First Nations people support the voice. Well, what do all Australians think? It's hard to answer, isn't it? Because
you know, I was going to leave it, but I'm not. I can't. I'll let her finish, and then I'm playing this other video.
Because Australians aren't one homogenous group with a single point of view. So too with First Nations Australians. But thanks to the thousands of consultations held throughout the country, we know that the vast majority of First Nations peoples support the voice. And surveys have consistently shown that over 80% of First Nations peoples support a voice.
What a crock.
They don't have the burden of proof to show that they are from that land. It's only because the system of native title, through multiple pathways, which I don't believe should ever be a part of a native title, because that's not our culture to accept different tribes coming into our land. That's bottom line. You cannot come into somebody else's land and you cannot sell or claim their land. It's in the same category as native title. You brought all these people in, they become the the people who manages native title because it's majority, and the same thing is happening with heritage, and you're going to be having the same problems about other people selling the land that doesn't belong to them. When you're looking at the voice, the voice is not going to change a thing. The voice is only looking after the city dwellers, not remote communities, because half of the remote people out there don't even know about the voice. Look, we all got our culture. We've got our surroundings. That's who we are. That's what we are. And that's how we want to live. We want to own what is ours under what we inherited from our ancestors. But most of them are chasing this gravy train, you know, that because everything is constituted and they have to be on there, you know. Yeah, look, we had Linda Burney and Pat Dodson come some time ago, you know, before they even talked about the voice or put it forward to the Australians. But they didn't really take on these concepts, what I'm telling you, what I explained to them. Nothing just came out of it. They disregarded my message altogether, so
there you
this
go.
is what
The
most
minister
of us
pushing it disregarded what he had to
about.
say.
No consultation, you know. No, I don't get anything from these people. It's hard to even get personal lawyers to, you know, fight against federal government service providers in native titles, you know. We just have to follow on.
So, James, if the voice gets voted yes, what happens to you? If the West Australian government won't listen to you and no one's listening to you on native title, do you think the voice would listen to your concerns, or would they listen to the concerns of other Indigenous tribes that might be against your interests?
You could see that that was the way the program was set up to initially get to the voice. I seen it. I've been in 3 native titles, and they all got determined, and it's the majority who are the people are on that yes vote because they've been looked after by government. Now, we all voting no because it's not something that we chose to do or anything like that, because we are our own individual voices. Every tribe is their own individual voices. You can't talk for anybody else's because you don't own their lands.
He put it well. If we lose officially free speech, we will be under tyranny. Yes, I agree with that. Everyone needs to write a significant response in relation to the misinformation bill we will be talking about later in the week. Yes, that is something that we will be very vocal about as well. People can only steal land within a civilization. One civilization cannot steal anything from another. That's not how it works.
A treaty should be implemented instead of a voice. Australia is the only country in the Commonwealth not to enter into a treaty with its First Nations peoples, and some believe that this would be a better foundation before we introduced a voice. Now, I support a treaty, but I think if Australians were asked to vote for or against a treaty this year, that it would fail. I don't believe it's the right time.
So the thing that I think is important won't get over the line, so we're going to virtue signal and push it through that way.
But what's important to know is that a voice doesn't preclude the option of a treaty if we all want to have one in the future. A single entity can't represent all First Nations peoples. Yes, this will be a challenge, but no more challenging than having a local government represent you, or a state.
The local government doesn't represent me. That's what I'm saying. I hate local governments. Local governments are only self-interested. All they do is collect tax and local rates, and hell, half the time they can't even get the bloody bins picked up on time. Are you seriously telling me that a small national organisation is going to be able to represent the interests of every Aboriginal person across Australia? Of course not. And no one's fucking saying that. Jesus.
Or Commonwealth government. You vote for them and then you place a degree of trust in them that they'll represent you well. Now, I think we'd all agree that these entities aren't perfect, nor will the voice be perfect, but they are structures we're familiar with, and by and large, they play their part. So let's not throw out an opportunity in favour of perfection. We don't have a role to play. you or your organisation are aligned with the common principles of fairness, diversity, equity and inclusion. Engaging in the voice sits really comfortably with these well-established values. And remember, the referendum includes everyone, your family and friends, your customers, your shareholders and key stakeholders. Being part of the conversation helps you stay in step with these really important people. Aboriginal people will be given too much power to make laws and the way in which Australia is governed. There's lots of misconceptions here, all roll into one. First, the Voice is an advisory body. That means it will...
If it was purely advisory, it doesn't need to have the word powers in that section. Functions covers it perfectly. The ability to advise is a function. A power is something that you can impose on somebody else.
Provide advice to government. It will not have the power to make laws. And it won't provide advice on all matters.
I should also specify as well, if they want to, they may not be able to make laws. However, rules and regulations are regularly delegated to individual members of cabinet, to individual advisory bodies, to whatever else.
Only the matters that affect First Nations peoples. So that might be Indigenous education or Indigenous...
Oh, fuck off.
...health. If you're not a First Nations person, it's highly unlikely that their advice will affect you.
The advice might not, but literally anywhere and anything coming into contact with them, yeah, maybe. I mean, look at it this way, okay? My parents used to live on a property. That property used to back onto a creek. Now, under the native title legislation, anything within a specific distance from any waterway is automatically considered to be of Aboriginal cultural sensitivity. Not only does that place a certain covenant on your land where you can and can't build, not only does that involve like whether or not you need to do certain surveys if you're going to try and dig a swimming pool or something. The saying that this is not going to impact on anybody else is disingenuous.
Finally, the Voice will have no veto power, so it can't overrule a decision that the government or the Parliament might make at any time. What happens if I vote no? Well, of course you could vote no. But remember that voting no does not mean you're saying yes to an alternative, such as a treaty or a different model. No other option is being presented to you in this referendum but a voice to Parliament. And so voting no for a voice means doing nothing. It means doing more of the same. It means accepting the status quo. And I think that most fair-minded Australians would agree that the position that First Nations people find themselves in is untenable and unacceptable by any measure. And so more of the same is not the answer. So consider this. Can you imagine developing a strategy for women and having a group of men do it? Sounds ridiculous, doesn't it?
Whoa! 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 Bitch, you better be tripping. Yeah, she went there. She went there. And yes, it happens in Victoria anyway. That's not the point. Way to conflate two massively different issues. Isn't that how the women got the vote? Well, yeah. Whoa.
It's hard to believe, but that's what we would have done until the recent past. But now we know better. Well, this is a bit the same. To date, non-Indigenous people across government have been developing strategies for First Nations peoples. A voice will mean that First Nation peoples will have a formal role in developing the solutions themselves alongside government. The voice won't be a silver bullet, but can you imagine how much more effective government programs...
Did she just say vote for something we know nothing about just because apparently we shouldn't do nothing? That's exactly what she said. That without knowing anything about this voice, without the complexities of what it's actually going to look like, without the proposal of what the actual department's going to be. And I'm sorry, you can say whatever you like. It's going to be a government department. That's the easiest definition of it. That's exactly what it is. It is a government department with potentially unfettered powers that can be delegated to it by the government of the day. So I'm sorry, no. Particularly given that if, they can say that they won't be changing laws or whatever else. Rules and regulations are very easy to institute for government departments. Just saying. Alongside government. Alongside. Yeah. You caught that too?
Programs would be if they are informed by those who are better placed to have the solutions. Remember, in the referendum, you're not voting on a model, you're not voting for an alternative like a treaty. It's far simpler than that. You're being asked if you agree or disagree to establish an entity to inform government.
Liar! Liar! That is not what you're being asked. And this is the problem that I have. If all people know is the question that's being asked on the referendum, not the contents of that legislation, that's the issue that I have.
So let's celebrate the key milestones in our reconciliation journey. Let's congratulate ourselves on what we've achieved so far. Now, let's look forward. Let's take an unapologetic, brave stance on this referendum to propel us further and faster towards a reconciled nation by saying yes.
Okay. So, moving on. Because I'm going to try and be fair, although that pissed me right the fuck off because that was nothing but that was nothing but propaganda. Why this law firm changed its mind on The Voice. Leading law firm Clayton Utz has changed its tact on the Indigenous voice, saying it's now a firm supporter of the yes vote at the referendum to be held this year. Chief Executive Partner Emma Kosovic told the Australian Financial Review of the switch when it comes only 4 months after the firm said it would not be taking a public stand on what it regarded as a political issue. She said she was appointed in December, but only assumed the role on July 1 and took the issue to Clayton Utz's board this week. It followed months of angst inside the firm, especially for those who said that it believed that they'd reneged on a 2019 commitment. Been fair this whole time. Tell us what you really feel. Look, even I'm willing to admit that I have been biased, but I mean, I admit that fully. So these are the ladies deciding that a major national law firm is going to support the yes vote. With 17 other firms, Clayton Utz signed a statement of support in 2019 for the Uluru Statement from the Heart and its call to establish a First Nations voice enshrined in the Constitution. All the other signatories confirmed this week that they are backing the yes vote. She said in a statement to the Financial Review that the firm had discussed the issue extensively since former Chief Executive Bruce Cooper outlined the firm's position in this newspaper in March. Mr. Cooper said Clayton Utz had adopted a policy on the public issues in 2020 and that ensured it stands above political engagement or debate. This is a partnership and there may be diverse views on the issues, he said, so I won't be advocating a firm position either way in the current environment. That's the way that it should be, frankly. Ms. Kosovic said the firm's new position reflected its long-standing commitment to Indigenous Australians. Over the past few months, as with many Australians, we as a firm have taken the time to educate ourselves about the different aspects of the debate. As a firm, we have promoted informed conversations and thoughtful analysis around the Uluru Statement and the referendum, and our staff and clients have actively engaged in these conversations. We as a firm support the Voice referendum. This support reflects our commitment to closing the gap between Indigenous and non-Indigenous Australians. The constitutional change is designed to ensure Indigenous Australians can make representations about laws and regulations that affect them. The referendum has the potential to make this a reality. It also has the potential to do far more than that. She acknowledged that other views may be held amongst the staff. The support for the Voice is a commitment from Clayton Utz, the firm, and in respecting our individual perspectives and views does not dictate how individual members of our diverse workforce should vote. Yeah, but it still means that you're putting something out there talking on other people's behalf. Imagine all the law firms profiting from multitudinous ongoing high court cases if a voice recommendation is not immediately put in place. Oh, we're going to get to the court cases. Being a civilization as a conquered people is like being an immigrant. You honour your home culture, but you integrate into the civilization you live in, says Luke Vino. Reconciliation Australia recently listed 70 organisations supporting a yes vote, which included law firms Ashurst, Norton Rose Fulbright, and DLA Piper. Shocked. I'm shocked. They're among the firms that signed the 2019 statement, which was hailed by voice architect Professor Megan Davis as a really significant development. The other firms were Allens, Arnold Block Lieber, Baker McKenzie, Clayton Oots, Cause Chambers Westgarth, Dentons, Fisher Dorr, Gilbert and Tobin, Herbert Smith Freehills, Holding Redlike, Jackson McDonald, Kingwood Mallisons, Lena and Rogers, Minter Ellison, and Russell Kennedy. All I'm saying is that list there is like reading off. They're all international like mega firms. They're These are the ones where, in my opinion, if you go and work for them, you're a cog in the machine. You're easily replaceable, and you don't really get treated like an individual. Anyway. You get the idea that I'm trying to convey here. These are... as likely for their ESG score. Quite possibly, yeah. In March, some balked at committing to a yes vote at the time when there was considerable debate over the proposed constitutional amendment. This week, all of those firms said yes, even though some, for example, Kingwood Mallison, have not made public statements to that effect. Kristen Stammer, executive partner at Herbert Smith Freehills, which is an in-principle supporter, in March said yes. We support the amendment to enshrine a First Nations voice in the Constitution. Our firm has a long-standing culture of partnership and reconciliation with Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. For the record, I don't have an issue with reconciliation. I don't have an issue with trying to bridge the divide. My concern is this is going to do the exact opposite as well. They're going to make a packet from the likes of Marsha Langton and Marcus Stewart. These firms are like the WEF, for example. I don't know if I'd go that far, mainly because I don't want to get done for defamation. We acknowledge the diversity of views on this topic and will seek to help drive an informed and respectful debate ahead of the referendum. Allen said it was committed to doing our part to educate and advocate, to listen to and work with partner organisations as we move forward towards the referendum. Arnold Block Liebler drew attention to a change in its signature blocks to say supports Indigenous voice and its enshrinement in the Constitution. Baker McKenzie said it continues to support the call for establishment of a First Nations voice in the Constitution and the referendum to establish the voice. The CEO of Lander and Rogers said the firm was a strong supporter. This position is consistent with our firm's support for the Uluru Statement from the Heart and reflects our long-standing commitment to reconciliation and better outcomes for Indigenous Australians. Amelia Paniva, the CEO of Jackson McDonald, said we support ongoing change in Australian society that will deliver equality and inclusion for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. The Law Council of Australia has advocated for a yes vote with the New South Wales Bar and Victorian Bar legal fraternity. However, the Queensland Bar said the voice did not fall within the range of core issues on which the association usually takes a public opinion. Forcing the future to pay for the past is the best way to divide and conquer. Well, there is that. Okay, so... a no vote to the voice will mean reconciliation is dead, according to Noel Pearson. Hang on. Nope, wrong button. There we go. I'm not going to say it. Indigenous campaigner Noel Pearson has warned Australians that if they do not vote yes to the Indigenous voice to Parliament, reconciliation will be dead and the nation would face a future of almost endless protest. Mr. Pearson said the claims before a parliamentary joint committee on Monday when asked about the consequences of a no vote. Reconciliation will die, it would be dead, he said. If fearmongering resulted in a no vote, it would be a complete tragedy for the country. Interesting, talking about fearmongering. I don't know how you could pick up the pieces after that. I think there will be a future of almost endless protest. That's a future I imagine. I can only foresee that a no vote would result in an ad infinitum, future of protest. That's Noel Pearson there, by the way. Sounds a bit like extortion. Vote yes or the reconciliation gets it. Asked about the practical benefits of the voice, he said he could not give practical examples. Rather, he said the voice is an expression of recognition. The Constitution is the place for recognition to be affected, and that's why I believe the constitutional voice is important. I think they are really beautiful words because this is the place where the country finally recognises Aboriginal and Torres Strait peoples as the first people of Australia. Mr. Pearson also slammed Father Frank Brennan's proposal to amend the voice to remove its constitutionally enshrined right to make representations to the bureaucracy. The problem with Frank is that he wants to decide what's achievable. And now that the voice is on the cusp, he has shifted to try and water down the proposition that Indigenous people believe would be effective and acknowledge is a good compromise. There's Tony Abbott, former Prime Minister. Earlier, former Prime Minister Tony Abbott squared off with Labor and Greens parliamentarians over the voice to Parliament, with the former Prime Minister telling a joint parliamentary committee that the proposal would divide our country on the basis of ancestry. Under questioning from Newcastle Labor MP Sharon Claydon, who sat behind a laptop prominently featuring a pro-voice bumper sticker, Mr. Abbott also said that while the advice of the Solicitor General on the voice should be considered, Solicitor Generals can get it significantly wrong. While the Solicitor General is a distinguished lawyer, other lawyers with no less distinction have come up with a very different view. I didn't know that Tony Abbott watches. Mr. Abbott told the committee that Aboriginal people, like all Australians, need to go to school and have adults have to go to work, and police have to keep people safe. He added that it was inconceivable that the High Court would not, if the voice were enacted as currently worded, wind up giving the new body the right to be heard and listened to by the government. I think the first time the voice makes a representation which, in its view, is inadequately heeded, I think it's off to the High Court, and I'm very confident that any conceivable contemporary High Court will find that the voice has an implied right to be heard, and that the government and the executive have an implied obligation to listen. There you go. Someone said the quiet part out loud. And I think as things stand, it's going to be on the High Court that determines all the ramifications of the proposed change. I think it's wrong to divide our country on the basis of ancestry, and I think it's a mistake to give about 4% of the population more of a say on how our government and parliament works than anyone else. I think that giving this voice a right to make representations effectively to everyone on everything is going to make the government much more difficult than it already is. Yeah, and see, that's the thing. People can water it down and say, oh, the representations are only on things that will affect the Indigenous people. What's the threshold for when something affects someone that is Indigenous? Driving a car. If they're driving, it affects someone that's Indigenous. Like, it's like so... like my brain's actually hurting because it's so, like... Yeah, most policies affect everyone. His testimony came after the Labor-run Joint Select Committee backflipped on its refusal to hear the former Prime Minister. I requested to appear in person to speak to the committee about my submission. My understanding is that the Labor majority refused to permit this, he said this morning. Oh, shock horror. The majority government that is pushing the voice didn't want to hear from one of the more prominent MPs, or former MPs. Actually, is he still MP? I think he's still an MP. He's a former Prime Minister anyway. They didn't want to hear him providing testimony as to why the voice was a bad idea. And they tried to block it. What is the government frightened of? Not long after the committee announced that it invited Mr. Abbott to speak. Leading Indigenous advocate and no-vote campaigner Warren Mundine has given powerful testimony to the Joint Parliamentary Committee, holding hearings on the proposed voice to Parliament, telling legislators that his own experience has taught him not to trust bureaucracy. Police strip-searched my father because he owned a house and was able to get things done, he told the committee. I come from that background and my attitude towards bureaucracy, and that's how I've always lived my life. Mr. Mundine said that he preferred a practical approach rather than a bureaucratic one run by the elites. Speaking via a remote hookup to Western Australia wearing a yellow shirt and an Akubra-style hat, Mr. Mundine said that the elite was a group of people who have been around for a number of years and have been pushing this idea to solve all of the problems of the Indigenous people, you have to set up another body. We've got the bodies, we have the traditional owners and their nations. These are the people that we should be talking to. Mundine said that of the 1967 referendum, that while the 1967 referendum united the country and was about equality, the Voice was just the opposite. A lot of people involved in the Voice have quite frankly been involved in Indigenous affairs for donkey's years, and this is a group of people who get a lot of money off the government, and that's how they see things. Earlier, Father Frank Brennan pleaded with the Senate committee to amend the wording to ensure it is legally watertight, and will not see the public service tied up in requests and representations. If you constitutionalise the entitlement to make representations to the public service about routine administrative decisions, the government will run the risk of seeing advice from the Voice tied up in the High Court. Father Brennan said the simple amendment to the proposed wording to ensure the Voice made representations solely to Parliament and ministers could eliminate the risk, even if the Parliament itself decided to give the Voice the right to also make representation to public servants outside the Constitution. Yeah, should specify as well, it's not just to Parliament, it's also to the Executive. They don't have to make representations to Parliament. Whatever representations they want to make, they can make directly to the Executive, to the Prime Minister, to the Cabinet. It doesn't have to be done in the open air and sterileness of Parliament. It'd be like giving a lobby group a direct line to the president. Whatever representations they make to him doesn't need to be made public. I see that as an issue. In terms of reducing risk, this is a slam dunk if this amendment is made. Father Brennan said he was speaking to those in the middle who want information and to make sure that the Voice is legally watertight. Earlier, powerful no-vote campaigners and said Australians could be warned that voting yes to an Aboriginal voice to Parliament will wave through a divisive agenda that will include treaty and a new truth-telling exercise trawling through Australian history when the government issues a booklet to voters spelling out both sides of the debate later this year. Recognise a Better Way, one of the leading groups campaigning for the no vote, has made claims that in a 2,000-word submission, that could form the basis of the booklet which will be sent to Australian householders after the Albanese government bowed to pressure in February. Calling claims by Labor that a yes vote is simply about recognising Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders in the Constitution, the submission says that the Voice would be a huge change to the way that Australia is governed. Indeed, as the Prime Minister said, it would be a very brave government that said it shouldn't follow the advice. Hey, before I go, how you doing? It also warns that the Voice, while not having a formal veto power, could use its platform to trade its ability to delay and grandstand for votes in the Parliament. A small group selected by race would have an immense power to advise Parliament and government on everything forever. Recognise a Better Way also calls the proposal an affront to equal citizenship for Australians. The Voice model preferred by the Prime Minister refers not only to the process of giving advice, which already exists through the Commonwealth Government and Parliaments, but also aims to bind the government and the Parliament to consultation standards across all Commonwealth public policy. Excuse me. While the Voice may not have a veto over legislation or government policy, it would have a platform to which it would trade its ability to delay and grandstand for votes in the Parliament. Politicians would trade with Voice members to do their bidding. The Voice would have a permanent platform to lobby government on matters affecting all Australians. The submission also says that there is no evidence that a voice to Parliament would help close the gap. You know what's interesting? I opened this one up expecting this to be pro-Voice, because it was supposed to be about Noel Pearson and promoting it. Interesting. Okay. New Australia versus Old Australia. A vote yes on the Voice is a vote for the future. I'm going to try and get through as many of these articles as quickly as I can, because I'm now running low on time and I still want to watch Linda Burney's address to the National Press Club. The referendum success will be a monumental achievement, but to arrive there, we need to explain to the country why a voice is needed. Changing the Constitution is a mammoth task. During the regional dialogues from the Uluru Statement of the Heart, I would recite the record with some trepidation. Only 8 out of 44 referendums have been successful since 1901. The old people would chortle knowingly, for they remembered the referendum from 1967, when Australians voted yes to the federal power to make laws for Aboriginal people. They'd either been active in the campaign themselves or watched their parents' campaign. They were not deterred by the record. They would proudly declare that they received the highest yes vote in the history of Australian referendums. They were earnest in their faith in the fundamental decency of Australian people. The 2023 campaign will determine whether that faith is misplaced or not. Because, enshrining it in the Constitution, you have to be a decent person. Or you have to be an indecent person to say no. The story so far seems to suggest that Noel Pearson's theory that Aboriginal people are the most unloved people belongs to an old Australia. This ghost of Australia past is sustained by a cashed-up no campaign, reliant on the economic and social might of the conservative silent generation and baby boomers with in-kind support from some media. Conservatives are busy carving out a convenient narrative for themselves that there is a reasoned and respectable case for no. There isn't. As the journalist Nikki Sava wrote, while it is not true to say that every Australian who votes no in the voice is racist, you can bet your bottom dollar that every racist will vote no. The cumulative wealth and power of the rusted-on no voters, their prominence in the media ownership and corporate boards, their conservatism and their unwillingness to commit to social change should be juxtaposed with the ascendant, vibrant New Australia, one that believes in social change and inclusion. Here it comes. New Australia appears to form the rump of the consistent majority yes polling over the past 6 years. It includes Gen Z and millennials, our multicultural brothers and sisters from the Middle East, North Africa and South Asia, and followers of Islam, Buddhism, Hinduism, and Greek Orthodox and Catholic faiths. It involves people with low incomes who live in the working class areas that are the heavy lifters of multiculturalism and social cohesion in the nation. The last election saw the consolidation of this new Australia. Australians voted in droves for the Greens and for the Teal Independents to previously safe Liberal seats. This demonstrated a groundswell of sentiment for action on the federal corruption, climate change, and the Uluru Statement from the Heart. This movement of Australian people was missed by the Canberra commentariat. On the Uluru Statement from the Heart and a constitutional voice to Parliament, Australians could see an unconventional yet compelling invitation to address one of the most accurate challenges for Indigenous Australia, getting the government to listen. Explain to me why anyone else should have any ability to get the government to listen any more than someone else. Persuading the nation of the exigency of change draws on Australians' observations that the status quo for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people is not working, and their own experience of bureaucracy is mean-spirited and punitive, as hundreds of thousands of Australians experience firsthand with the robo-debt scheme. Ooh, way to draw that in. Australians have low levels of trust in their politicians, seeing them as absorbed by adversarial parliamentary politics, internal leadership quarrels, and internecine pre-selection spats. Seminal to all of this is the failure of Canberra to hear Australians in times of need. The spectre of a Prime Minister, Scott Morrison, abandoning his people in the darkest hour amid fire and flood. Bitch, are you seriously wow. Yeah, look, I was pissed off because he disappeared to Hawaii during the bushfires. This is not something that you can compare to that, though. That's some bullshit. Yeah, that's pretty much what it boils down to. We're inclusive, but we reject you if you disagree with us. Thus, we're not inclusive. Together, we've been let down as a people. This is a unifying sentiment. The invitation issued to the Australian people is also shadowed by the 3 decades-long reconciliation process that began after Bob Hawke reneged on his commitment to a treaty at Boronga in 1988. Instead of a treaty, because the West Australian election was looming and the electoral calculus of the Aboriginal recognition and mining interests did not mesh, Hawke's cabinet decided a reconciliation process was needed first. Reconciliation was the fad of the 90s. Developed in Latin American countries and in South Africa, it purported to bring societies back together after serious conflict or dictatorship in a process known as transitional justice. It theorized a pathway for perpetrators and victims to reconcile and live together in peace under the law. Transitional justice has failed many of the countries that deployed it, and there are many given that the United Nations were given the United Nations stamp of approval. Where the fuck is Airbus Elbow been? Yeah. In the dialogues, our old people keep saying without prompting that reconciliation was the wrong word. They said it implied the restoration of friendly relations after conflict, but they said we have never met. This is what the Uluru Statement stands for. It is a beginning, it is about recognition, and it is about renewal. It is in the hands of friendship extended to the Australian people, an invitation to come and meet with us. An issue in issuing the statement to all Australians, the First Nation hoped to bypass the ritual cynicism of Australian retail politics and ask Australians of all religions, cultures and political persuasions to read the statement and hear in their own words the logic for change. Seeking constitutional reform to empower our people and take a rightful place in our own country. We call for the establishment of First Nations voice enshrined in the Constitution. How the hell is... You can easily take your rightful place in the country, the same as everybody else, without being recognised in the Constitution. We hoped Australians would listen, and they were listening, and they're still listening. Thus, we have a commitment to a referendum, a clear roadmap of reform, a 12-year recognition process debated by successive governments and parliaments, an alteration to the text and ballot question. For this referendum to succeed will be a monumental achievement of this nation, but we are not there yet. To arrive at our destination, we need to explain to Australians why the voice is needed. Indigenous policy issues are alien to most, and the loudest voices are often on the subject are often the politicians who are most ineffective in policy areas. To begin that work, I want to share a famous Northern Territory story that Pat Anderson told 21 years ago at the National Press Club. It's about an old man from the top end. He's passed away now, but this is what happened to him. He was living quietly on an outstation near Kakadu. One day, some government workers drove up in a four-wheel drive while the old man was sitting out front of his tin shed. He got up and introduced himself and showed them around a bit. As they were leaving, they asked him if there was anything he needed. "Oh yeah, if you're coming back this way, you could bring me a couple of packets of tomato seeds. I'd like to try growing some tomatoes here for myself." Well, the government workers went back to town, told their boss about the old man who wanted to grow tomatoes on his outstation, and their boss told their boss and so on. After a while, all these people started arriving at the old man's station. Geologists came out to take soil and rock samples. Meteorologists arrived with all sorts of gadgets to measure wind speed and rainfall. Ecologists set up a camp to study the ecosystem and do environmental impact studies. Agronomists arrived to do feasibility studies on market gardens in the tropics. All the while, the old man sits on the front of his tin shed watching this very entertaining activity. Eventually, after 7 months, one of the scientists comes up to him and asks him how he is. "I'm fine," says the old man, "but I'm still waiting for the packet of tomato seeds." Okay, A, X'd out that really happened. B, I completely understand the allegory of the whole bureaucracy and bullshit there. I get that. I really do. I don't think that's going to change with the voice, though. I really don't. So, but anyway. Alright. Okay, so those were the stuff for the yes side. Okay. It's called The Voice because there will only be one under the misinformation laws. Wow, you're really upset about that, aren't you? Relax, we will get there. 2 seconds, guys. I'm just going to do a quick bio break before we get stuck into this because there's another hour of this show. I am going to go long today just because we need to get this covered. Okay, let's get stuck back into this. Okay, not ignorant or racist, no voters want their legitimate concerns taken seriously. Welcome back to yours sincerely. This week, online comments and letter writers took to their keyboards to discuss the Indigenous voice to Parliament referendum and why the yes may lose the vote at the ballot box. Oh, what the hell? I'm already logged in. Why has this happened? Okay, hang on. Oh, bloody hell. I wanted to do this one because it was what everyday people were actually saying about it. And there it is. Okay. Yep, got it. Will genuine problems bring down the voice? Political and international editor Peter Harcher wrote that unless something dramatic changes, the referendum for an Indigenous voice to Parliament will fail. Thousands of readers commented, the first step to improving life for first Australian people is getting white Australians to agree to it. This is the real test that we're facing as a nation. Right, that's not inherently racist. Why is the voice going to magically uncover solutions to Indigenous disadvantage that highly influential and admired Indigenous elites have not been able to bring to decision makers' attentions? I'm rushing again. I need to breathe. To all those undecided on the voice, please just stop it. Non-Indigenous people being undecided on Indigenous issues has got us a lot of parlous states that we are in today. How about we give Indigenous ideas a go? Okay. Tired of being lectured by the elitist proponents of the voice, including sports people, academics, and the media. This attitude that we are voting no because of fear-mongering, ignorance, or racism is nonsense. Continued failure to address our legitimate concerns about the voice will only encourage more to vote no. Those who don't question anything will simply accept what celebrities tell them to vote yes. Those who think it through, ask questions, will do their own research, and will vote no. I predict that many of the rusted-on yes voters will eventually change their minds and vote no. Only a small percentage of voters are impervious to logic and reason and will vote on a vibe. Okay, so this is really just comments. Damn it. Okay. Alright. While Puri Elder opposes Indigenous voice to Parliament, seeks to vote to delay for community clarity. A remote desert elder says he will vote against the Indigenous voice to Parliament in the upcoming referendum, arguing that there is not enough information and people don't know what they are voting for. A referendum this year will decide whether a proposed Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander voice should be enshrined in the Australian Constitution. Senior Walpiri leader Ned Hargreaves has called this week for the federal government to delay the vote so more people have a chance to understand the voice. If I give you a written paper in my language and you try to read it and try to understand it, would you sign it? He said. Let's postpone it so we have more idea what the voice is. We'll talk some more and know exactly what it does mean to us. Mr. Hargreaves argued that the voice would not help with issues impacting on First Nations peoples, including the overrepresentation of Indigenous people in prison and youth detention. He added that he did not trust the voice to properly represent his community. When you look at our dreamings, our laws, we don't want another person who doesn't know my... I don't want to just be disrespectful and mispronounce that. Tukurpa? Tukurpa? I hope I've gotten that right. My dreamings and to handle it, he said. But while he was standing against the voice for now, Mr. Hargreaves said he did not back Northern Territory Senator Jacinta Price, who was leading the No campaign. I'm not a fan of Jacinta, but I am for my people, he said. Because my people need to know exactly what we want, what we are saying yes to. Arnett Mann Tyson Carmody is the founder of the King's Narrative, which provides cultural appropriate counselling to Aboriginal men in Central Australia. He acknowledged this week that he had reservations about the voice too. Government funding has failed the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people well and truly, Mr. Carmody said. So you can imagine why at King's Narrative there is a reluctance to have a voice to Parliament to the very government agencies or political parties who have consistently disregarded our voice. But Mr. Carmody said that while the implementation of the voice could be problematic to begin with, he encouraged people to vote yes with an asterisk. No! That is dangerous! Vote yes with an asterisk. Seriously. King's Narrative will be voting yes, but we will be critical of the implementation to ensure our voices are heard locally, collectively, and uncomfortably. We encourage our families, our community, and Australia to vote yes to bring your criticism so that eventually, when it does work, it works properly. Recent polling has revealed that the No campaign is gaining momentum. This week, Senator Price told the ABC this trend was not surprising and had argued many Indigenous communities did not support the proposal. Australians aren't silly and they won't be taken for mugs, she said. And the more people ask questions about the voice, the less detail they seem to be getting, and people just want to know how it's going to work. And Kalkakoon woman Rachel Perkins, co-chair of Australians for Indigenous Constitutional Recognition, said she had a high regard for Mr. Hargraves and had known him for decades, but she said there was already significant information on the voice with more detail to come, and urged Australians to get informed. Postponing it is really just another tactic of the No campaign, which is easy. All you have to do is create uncertainty, misinformation, and confusion. That's enough to get people to vote no. She said the vast majority of Indigenous people backed the voice. There will always be a small margin of Indigenous people who don't support it for completely different reasons. But it's very important to know that longitudinal studies over the years have shown that Indigenous people support this in an overwhelming majority. Yes, but who was asked? Chicken Little saying that she's whiter than him. So there you go. Anything there? Average response to COVID, the best example of why the voice will make a difference? Oh, for God's sakes. Okay. And here we go. Indigenous voice. No campaign's deep links to conservative Christian politics has been revealed. Because, you know, nothing like the left hammering down on conservative Christians to try and make a point. Do have Aboriginal ancestry, so I'll call out these grifters. Fair enough. Lobby groups campaigning to sink the Indigenous Voice to Parliament referendum have deep links to a number of conservative Christian organisations and consultancies a Guardian investigation can reveal. The No campaign is working with companies that appear to specialise in conservative Christian campaigning, including a US-headquartered marketing and fundraising firm that aims to help Christian non-profit ministries fulfil their mission. Our investigation also shows links between the No campaign and the failed Conservative push to defeat the Marriage Equality Postal Survey in 2017. Wow! Digging deep to try and discredit the No campaign there. The public tactic of the No campaigns are heavily influenced by conservative US politics, social media experts say. Importing US approaches into Australia during election campaigns has rarely worked, but a referendum is very different, said Axel Burns, a professor at Queensland University of Technology's Digital Media Research Centre. The choice is more similar to US voting. You can run these polarised campaigns that are about two stark choices. So who are the No campaign? The most prominent organisation in the No campaign is Fair Australia, which is an arm of the conservative body group called Advance. That's a little bit misleading. The former Prime Minister Tony Abbott is a member of Advocacy's advisory board, and the Country Liberal Party Senator Jacinta Price is Fair Australia's spokesperson. Fair Australia, in turn, is one half of the Australians for Unity organisation, which the federal government gave deductible gift recipient status last month in effect recognising it as a primary No campaigning vehicle. The other half of the Australians for Unity group is led by Warren Mundine, called Recognise a Better Way. Ed Cooper, a global expert on misinformation and politics online, said the No campaign strategy was to appeal to people on a very emotive level, to simplify the issue and play on people's emotions and fears. Funny thing is, I don't necessarily disagree with any of the words that they just said. Cooper is the director of strategy group Populares and has given advice about misinformation to both the government's referendums working groups and the Yes campaign. The playbook is very similar to the Donald Trump ecosystem. They said the bad word. They said the DT word. Fair Australia and Advance share much of the same content on their Facebook pages, including criticism of the Minister for Indigenous Australians, Linda Burney, and Prime Minister Anthony Albanese, praise for the No campaign leaders Mundine and Price, and scepticism of the Voice. The pages regularly post heavily edited graphics featuring unflattering photos of Labor politicians or Voice campaigners, often tinted red or made to look out of focus. Advance is also running two other very different campaigns. One is Referendum News, which portrays itself as a neutral news source. The other is Not Enough, which highlights the so-called progressive no arguments against the Voice from prominent Indigenous people such as Lydia Thorpe, who argues that the Voice should be much stronger. The message varies, but that's why they have different pages talking to different people. The reason you set up a referendum news page is to dupe people into the mistaken belief that they're seeing neutral info. And of course, that's not what they're seeing. They're seeing no campaign messages masquerading as news. That's straight out of the Republican playbook in the US, and it's been used for several years. It's very effective. Orange Man is still darker than most of these yes grifters. See, the annoying thing is, I specifically wanted this to be part of the No campaign, and this is just smearing the No campaign. I really got to start reading more of these before I... Anyway. Moving across to the Rule of Law Education Centre. First Nations voice to Parliament the argument for voting no. Why we cannot vote yes in the current referendum proposal. Constitutional recognition of Indigenous people is desirable and can be achieved. However, this referendum on the voice is the wrong way to achieve that goal, as it creates a constitutional entity with unlimited scope that erodes a fundamental principle of a democracy, the equality of citizenship. It is simply incorrect to equate opposition to the proposed voice with opposition to constitutional recognition of Indigenous people. The people of goodwill would readily accept a constitutional change that recognised Indigenous people were the first occupants of the continent. The real purpose of this referendum is to change our system of government by injecting a permanent element of racial privilege into the heart of the Constitution. It would give Indigenous Australians and their descendants for all time a second method of influencing public policy that goes beyond the benefits of representative democracy that are already enjoyed by all citizens regardless of race. It would constitutionalise a race-based lobby group equipped with a separate bureaucracy that would give Indigenous citizens the ability to have an additional say on every law and administrative decision, not just those related specifically to Aborigines and Torres Strait Islanders. Stop orange hate. Although constitutional recognition of Indigenous people is a worthwhile goal, this referendum should be rejected as it introduces a new entity within the Constitution with almost unlimited scope that threatens equality of citizenship in Australia. 8 years ago, I saw nothing wrong with requiring Parliament to listen to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders before using the power under Section 51(26) of the Constitution to make special laws that only affect Indigenous people. I still hold that view. This early model is what many people believe that they are being asked to endorse. They are wrong. This is not what is on offer at this referendum, according to Chris Merritt, Vice President of the Rule of Law Education Centre and Legal Affairs contributor to the Australian newspaper. The problem with the current model for the voice comes down to two associated issues. The unlimited scope of the subject matter in which the voice can involve itself, and the equality of citizenship where all Australians should be equal not just before the law, but before those who make those laws and who apply the law. Unlimited scope. Support for the voice that provides advice on laws that relate only to Indigenous people. There is a legitimate argument that Indigenous people should be heard before Parliament making special laws about them under the Constitution's race power in Section 51(26). In practice, that power has only ever been used to make laws on Indigenous affairs. So because Indigenous people are the only Australians singled out by race for special laws, there is a logical argument for matching that power with a requirement that they should be heard before that power under Section 51(26) is exercised. It would therefore make sense to establish a voice if it were limited to providing advice to Parliament, not the executive, on laws enacted under Section 51(26). It might even be feasible to give it a flexible boundary so that it could provide advice on matters that have a specific impact on Indigenous people that goes beyond the impact on the general community. See, that would be perfectly fine. There are four corners to that. That would be a perfect way to do it, because they're right. Section 51(26) has only ever been enacted to make laws about Indigenous Australians. There is no reason why there can't be an advisory body that gets to speak up every time that particular power is being used, because that's the only time that they have a specific, where they're specifically carved out as the ones being affected. It is perfectly logical for Indigenous people to have a say before Parliament makes special laws on the basis of race that affect them alone. Indigenous voice extends beyond Indigenous matters. The Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander may make representations to the Parliament and the Executive Government of the Commonwealth on matters relating to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. The jurisdiction of the voice extends beyond matters that relate only to Indigenous affairs and includes any matter that relates to Indigenous peoples. The voice is free to involve itself in any debate that affects the broader community so long as it relates to Indigenous people. On January 26th, Noel Pearson told Patricia Cavalis on ABC Radio, there is hardly any subject matter that Indigenous people would not be affected by and would not want to provide their advice to Parliament. Indigenous constitutional lawyer Megan Davis, who helped develop the voice, shares this view. On December 21 last year, she was asked on ABC television what issues Indigenous Australians wanted to talk about at Parliament through The Voice. Her answer, at this point, virtually every issue. Then on July 5th, Minister for Indigenous Affairs Linda Burney asserted that she will ask The Voice to consider 4 main priority areas: health, education, jobs and housing. Her statement validates these criticisms that The Voice would not be limited to areas of critical importance to Indigenous people, but instead would have a remit that goes right across the board. If the government had wanted to focus The Voice on Indigenous affairs or on matters that relate only to Indigenous people or even primarily to Indigenous people, it would have included such qualifications in the words to be inserted into the Constitution. Every law affects every person. It's ludicrous to claim that some laws that only affect some people. Equality of citizenship. In the referendum, we're being asked to constitutionalise a race-based lobby group paid for by the taxpayers that could involve itself in not just debates on Indigenous affairs, but in debates on all matters of public policy, all proposed laws and all administrative decisions. It will be empowered to make representations that reach into the executive branch of government and not just the Parliament, because it specifically says the Parliament and the executive government. That extended scope means we're being asked to constitutionalise a system of racial preference. Extending the jurisdiction of The Voice beyond Indigenous affairs as proposed by the government cannot be reconciled with the idea that all Australians should be equal, not just before the law, but before those who make the law and those who apply the law. It would give one group of Australians an entitlement to additional and unjustified influence over all public policy, all lawmaking and all public administration. Consider what the country would look like if the referendum succeeds. Those with the right genetic inheritance and their descendants for all time would gain an additional method of influencing politicians and officials that would surpass the normal rights of citizenship. The Voice would be empowered to make race-based representations about all areas of public administration and all new laws. Public servants would be in a truly dreadful position. Instead of making decisions according to the law and instructions of their superiors, they would need to consider representations from an institution of state whose only purpose would be to inject racial preference into public administration. Every federal minister and every decision maker in the federal service could be at risk unless they inform The Voice before making decisions, provide information about matters awaiting decision, wait for a response from The Voice, and generate a paper trail showing the views of The Voice have been considered. How much information will ministers and public servants be required to give The Voice about decisions that they propose to make? How long would ministers and public servants need to wait while The Voice considers its position? As Paul Kelly, editor-at-large of the Australian newspaper, recently said, The Voice contradicts the principles of equality of citizenship that enshrines and binds together our nation. The Voice is based on the principle that we have different constitutional rights depending on our ancestry. We need to think about that as a country and think whether or not we really want that to happen. The Voice contradicts the principle of equality of citizenship that enshrines and binds us together as a nation. This is a change to our constitution that, being realistic, would be forever. What would that mean for the unity of our country? Racial preference never ends well. Equality of citizenship is fundamental to what it means to live in democracy. It is reinforced by the fact that the source of Australian sovereignty is the people of the nation, all of them, regardless of race or national origin, and regardless of whether they arrived yesterday or have antecedents who arrived 60,000 years ago. If you believe everyone should be equal in the eyes of the law and the eyes of those who make and administer the law, the referendum must be rejected. I thought that was quite poignant and well put, frankly. And finally, why an Aboriginal elder is voting no in the Voice referendum, what are we saying yes to? An Aboriginal elder has said that he will vote against the Voice to Parliament unless it is delayed to allow more time. Ned Hargraves, who is... Oh, hang on, same guy. Who was an elder of the Walpiri people in the rural area of Northern Territory, northwest of Alice Springs, argued that there's a significant lack of information. He called on the government to delay the referendum, which will happen in the last quarter of 2023, as several questions about the Voice remain unanswered. He wants to know how an advisory body can guarantee important issues to the Indigenous community will be addressed. He's also seeking to understand how it can guarantee the laws and traditions of every Aboriginal tribe being acknowledged, with more than 400 distinct tribes scattered around Australia. While the majority of Aboriginal Australians continue to support the Voice, polling suggests residents across the country are becoming increasingly opposed to it. Whichever way this goes, the country is permanently divided. Yep. Basically. Hargraves told the ABC that he was concerned about the ramifications of the referendum passing without Indigenous communities being properly informed about what it entails. People need to know exactly what we want and what we're saying yes to. The Aboriginal elder highlighted concerns that the voice would have little impact to curb issues currently faced by Indigenous Australians, such as disproportionate percentages of First Nations people in prison. According to data from the ABS, in June last year, 31% of all prisoners were Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islander, despite the Indigenous community representing 3.1% of the total population. Of these in prison, 78% had already spent time in the prison system for prior offences. He also said specific issues relating to individual tribes could be miscommunicated if only a general voice to Parliament passes. Although currently being on the same side of the debate as an MP and leader of the No campaign, Jacinta Price, he does not have her back. I'm not a big fan of Jacinta, but I am for my people. So you've actually got Indigenous Australians campaigning and saying no. Admittedly, it's because they want more power, but according to polling from the national broadcaster, which averages national polls on The Voice, support for the referendum has started to dwindle. The binary poll shows Australians are starting to become more conditioned with voting no on the referendum as the voting draws closer. A March poll by YouGov suggested that 732 Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Australians showed 83% supported The Voice. Okay, well, that's somewhere where they've pulled some of the figures from. Minister for Indigenous Australians, Linda Burney, has recently claimed the No campaign had adopted Trump-style politics to derail support for The Voice. The aim is to polarise and sow division in our society by making false claims, she said. Do not let the No campaign get away with using Trump-style politics. Do not let them divide us. In June, a news poll showed overall support for The Voice plunged 3 points to just 43%. The No vote rose 4 points to 47%, putting it ahead in time for the time since news poll began tracking support. Okay, all right. There's the disparity discrimination fallacy. Alrighty, where is... Sorry, now I need to go back to my other page so we can do the National Press Club address. Hang on one second. I'm just going to take this off so that I can just be on camera for a second so that I can bring up... Where's it gone? No, that's the stuff on the misinformation bill. I need that for next week. Ah, there it is. Okay. Alright, so now I'm going to bring up Linda Burney's address to the National Press Club, which I think was about a week ago, where she answers questions. So basically this is an opportunity for journalists to actually dig in and see what they can get out of her. In the event that YouTube decides that they don't like the fact that I'm using a ABC National Press Club video, I will be switching over to Rumble. I'll be keeping an eye on it to see whether or not it goes blank, but just so you're aware. 84% of statistics are fabricated 5% of the time. Okay. Alright, and here we go. Oh, hang on. This is about an hour, but they usually go slow, so I will put this playback speed up, and I'll be stopping every now and then to discuss.
Away from voting in their first referendum in more than 2 decades. She's campaigning in support of a constitutionally enshrined Indigenous voice to Parliament. Linda Burney, today at the...
Thank you very much for the super chat there, Angel Australia. Mr. BS about The Voice. I'm a no anyway. Thanks, Aussie. Angel, the entire show has been about The Voice. We've gone through everything from the history to what's going to be contained in the question and why I personally am voting no, but I'm encouraging everyone to do their own research and make their own decisions. But yeah, so... If you create a precedent demanding group representation for every law, then in a few years you'll have a group representative for every group. Today it's Aboriginals, tomorrow it's Muslims, then Christians. The Voice BS is unending. Alright.
National Press Club.
Christians, okay.
Press Club and the Westpac Address, coming to you today from Ngunnawal and Ngambri country, Canberra. My name's Laura Tingle, I'm the club's president. The debate about the voice to Parliament seems to have been going on for a long time, and the discussion about Indigenous recognition for the Constitution even longer. Yet we are regularly told that with the passage of the enabling legislation for the referendum now finally passed, the debate is just beginning. It has already been at times for many Australians either divisive or inspiring. Our speaker today, Australia's first female Indigenous Minister for Indigenous Australians, Linda Burney, plays a key role in steering that debate between now and referendum day. Before she addresses us, however, in this NAIDOC week, I'd like to invite Ngambri, Wallabalua and Wiradjuri Elder, Auntie Dr Matilda House-Williams, to welcome us to country, noting she has this week been recognised as the National NAIDOC Female Elder of the Year.
I want to thank Laura for all the wonderful things, and I'm not going to get soppy and teary. So, and also here, I want to thank my Minister for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Affairs, the Honourable Linda Burney, and to all my friends that are here today, for her and for myself as well, you know, my country, yeah. And so I want to thank you all for being here, and welcome to this beautiful land, the land of my great-great-great-grandfather, Black Harry, a wonderful man who paved the way for myself. And I'm here to support anybody who wants to have a helping hand. So thank you all and welcome to this beautiful land, and to my Linda and to my... am I getting dementia? No, Laura. Yeah, okay, so thank you very much, enjoy.
Linda Burney to address us today.
Well, thank you so much for that welcome. And it was wonderful to be at the NAIDOC Ball in Brisbane on Saturday night to see Auntie Matilda get the Female Elder of the Year. And I have to say, absolutely deserved. So another clap. Balam Ambo, Nanawal, Ngambri, Yinyamara, Nadu, Yerabang, Marang. In the language of my people, the Wiradjuri, I pay respect to the Ngunnawal and Ngambri people and honour their custodianship and care for country. And I extend that respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people here today from all points of the southern sky. I also want to acknowledge my dear friend Jed Carney, Rachel Stevens-Smith, Marcus Stewart, the wonderful Auntie Geraldine Atkinson, Professor Brian Smith, and of course, Justin Mohammed, our first First Nations ambassador ever. So a huge congratulations to Justin. But most importantly, happy NAIDOC, everyone.
Fourth pillar of government, upper and lower house of government, the courts, and then maybe the voice. Is effectively what it boils down to, yeah. Chicken Little. Dear friend Phoebe Foster's and 4X. 1/8 Norwegian should I ever say in all Norwegian politics? Well, apparently.
The theme this year is for our elders. In his landmark speech, Beyond the Morning Gate, delivered in 2000, the father of reconciliation, my dear friend, Senator Patrick Dodson, used the term unfinished business. The unfinished business of our failure to recognise Indigenous Australians who had coexisted on this continent for more than 65,000 years. Now, 122 years after the Australian Constitution was formed, more than 80 years since William Cooper had his petition, 35 years since the Barunga Statement, 30 years since Keating's Redfern speech, 16 years since John Howard promised a referendum for recognition, 15 years since the apology, 13 years since the expert panel on constitutional recognition, and 6 years, everyone, since the Uluru Statement from the heart.
No, well, to be fair, I mean, they don't class... Here in Australia, we don't really bother taking into account, you know, small military conflicts where it may only be one or two people getting into a confrontation. That doesn't really get classed as a war, for example. But yeah, no. I mean, look, and that's sort of the thing as well. Given that there are so many different tribes as opposed to one recognized body or anything like that, a lot of this does seem disingenuous to me as well. So
The question must surely be asked: how much longer do Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people have to wait for recognition? When will we finally resolve this unfinished business? As Pat Anderson says, let's finish the unfinished business between us all. If not now, when? We are so close. Our destination is on the horizon. We are just a few short months away from realising the promise of the Uluru Statement, that historic First Nations consensus on the way forward, where 250 Indigenous leaders and elders gathered in the red dirt at Uluru to issue the statement from the heart. The idea of constitutional recognition through a voice is what Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people have asked for themselves, not the government. Later this year, Australians, you will be asked a simple question. Do you support a change to the Constitution to recognise the First Peoples of Australia by establishing an Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander voice?
no. Not that I don't appreciate that. That is the pinnacle of the disingenuous bullshit that is being promoted here. It's a simple question. We're just going to ask you whether or not you support enshrining it in the Constitution that there be a voice. Again, if that's all it was, I wouldn't have an issue with it.
Yes or no? Canada recognised First Nations people in the 1980s. In New Zealand, the Crown recognised the Maori people as far back as 1840. In 2023, it is time for Australia to recognise Indigenous Australians. The first question I want to address today is, why is the voice needed? And the simple answer is because the gap isn't closing fast enough. For far too long, governments have made policies for Indigenous Australians, not with Indigenous Australians. We need a voice to change that. We need the voice because we need to work in partnership with communities. We need a voice because we need to do better. And we particularly need to do better by young Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. More than half of all Indigenous Australians are under the age of 25. But our young people don't start on a level playing field. They need hope. They need opportunities for their parents and elders did not have. They need a voice. Consider this, and please stand in these shoes. Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people are...
Noddy coming in with a super chat. Do not trust the government, all sides to do anything. Simple reason for me to vote no. Trust us, bro. I'd vote for less government power. Yeah, no shit. And can I just fact check a couple of things there that she said about the Canadians and the New Zealanders recognising Maoris. I just want to clarify something, okay? Nearly 1 in 5 people in New Zealand are Maori, a native Indigenous in New Zealand. I couldn't find out what the percentages are for Canada. But it's like 3% here in Australia. 3 in 100 instead of 1 in 20. And it's not even as if they have their own voice to the parliament in New Zealand. You're conflating apples and oranges, and you're doing it to try and sell me lemons.
55 times more likely to die from rheumatic heart disease than non-Indigenous people. These deaths are completely preventable. With access to medical care,
Lawyer math.
proper housing and clean running water. Indigenous young people are 24 times more likely to be locked up than their neighbours. In the words of the Uluru Statement, we are not an innately criminal people. First Nations children represent 37% of all children removed from their parents, but make up only 6% of Australia's children. This number is unacceptably high. And yet the number of Indigenous children living in out-of-home care is expected to double in the next 6 years. And this cannot be because we have no love for them. Our people are more likely to have experienced homelessness than to hold an undergraduate degree. In 2020, the number of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people locked up in a prison cell was 4 times as many as those who celebrated graduating university that year. 4 times as many of our people with despair rather than hope for their future. Does this mean that Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people have no aspirations and dreams for a better future? Of course not. This is systemic and structural disadvantage. The suicide rate of our people
Don't know, Tweety. She
is
really
almost twice the rate.
She's a parliamentarian.
Of our
They
fellow
rarely ever
Australians.
release their sources.
All these numbers sometimes obscure the fact that this is about real people with families and loved ones, real people like Michael Riley. Michael grew up in poverty in Dubbo during the 1960s. He spent time on Talbragar Reserve, an overcrowded place with terrible conditions, and medical care was almost...
Should clarify, Derna, you've hit one of the nails on the head there. Since a lot of the problems stem from substance abuse, wouldn't the Voice have the power to enact prohibition of alcohol? There's already a prohibition of alcohol in certain places in the Northern Territory. It has caused some shit. They're already doing that. They're already making it so that it's difficult to get a hold of these substances. And as bad as it sounds, when you can't get a hold of drugs, when you can't get a hold of alcohol, when you can't get a hold of cigarettes, you turn to things like sniffing petrol to get high. And unfortunately, that results in a skewed result and statistic in terms of deaths. Yeah, they don't really need the Voice to prohibit them from having alcohol, because they're not happy about not having alcohol. Catherine's still limited to 1 carton per day, must show ID, etc. No prohibition on alcohol in Linda's office.
almost non-existent, like so many others who were forced to live in these poor conditions. Michael suffered from chronic infections. He got rheumatic fever, a condition which his immune system never recovered. Michael became a renowned photographer, and his work was shown throughout the world. At the peak of his career, at the age of 44, he died of end-stage renal failure. I was very close to Michael. I visited him every day in hospital. I watched him go blind in one eye. His Aboriginality condemned to an early death, a preventable death. I remember being by his bedside with his cousin Lynette when he passed. I remember the injustice of it, and it's what still motivates me to this day. It's what motivates me every day to put one front foot in front of the other, to do better by Indigenous Australians, to do better for future generations. And we can and must do better. Just last month, we saw new data that showed 4 of the 19 closing the gap targets were on track. Just 4 out of 19. Life expectancy, not on track. Indigenous babies born with healthy birth weights, not on track. Finishing year 12, not on track. Indigenous people engaged in jobs and training.
This is such horse shit. Oh, all these things that we were trying to make sure were going to... Low aromatic fuel was invented because of the issues in the Northern Territory. Well, there is that. You know why all these things happen, Linda? Failure to integrate. Show me another segment of Australian society that has anywhere near the level of issues. I'm sorry, there's only so long you can keep playing the victim card when it is an issue that is readily fixable within your own society.
Not on track. If we needed any more evidence that more of the same isn't good enough, then this is it.
Yeah, she's saying it's
we have to
our
do
fault.
things better. And I honestly believe the voice can help. We have everything to gain and nothing to lose by supporting the voice. Because the voice will be a mechanism for government and the parliament to listen. It will be like a resource of local knowledge and solutions that can help make us better and help make better policies. The great leader of the Gummidge clan of northeastern Arnhem,
You know, off the top of my head, I don't know. I mean, if you're talking native Australians, I think even out in the bush, the average age...
It was the truth. Governments don't have to listen.
Before I make a dick
whether
myself,
it be local, state or federal governments. My predecessor, Ken White, put it well, reflecting on his time as minister when he said, on key areas of health and education, I saw no reflection of Aboriginal input into the discussions that led to legislation being put to the Parliament and the party room. The voice is about advice. Since 1967, when the Commonwealth gained powers to make laws for Aboriginal people, governments have tried to develop some sort of consultative mechanism, and many haven't worked. The second question I want to answer today is how will the voice work? First, let's be clear about what the voice is, how it will help to deliver a better future and do better than past bodies. The voice will be independent, representative advisory body made up of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. The voice will be
she's the government
nimble,
minister for Indigenous Affairs, so I don't know, a few $100,000.
On making a practical difference. That is what Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people have asked for, to be heard. It will be chosen by local communities for local communities. The voice will give independent advice to Parliament and the government on issues affecting Indigenous people and communities. This will lead to better outcomes because we know that listening to people from the grassroots levels lead to better outcomes. The voice will provide independent advice for better decisions. It will empower local voices. Every state, territory, the Torres Strait Islands and remote communities will be represented. It will be gender balanced and include the views of young people. It will consult with local communities.
How much
it
will
will
she be
be
paid?
accountable and
Good
transparent, and it will cooperate with existing organisations. One question I'm sometimes asked is, why does the voice need to be in the Constitution? Why can't it just be legislated? Well, there are two main reasons, everyone. Firstly, a voice or representative body cannot be truly independent or give frank advice to the government of the day if the government of the day can abolish it with the stroke of a pen. And we've seen that.
The wording of the Constitution is not going to disavow that. They will still be able to remove the funding, the function, the form, everything with a stroke of the pen. It doesn't need to be in the Constitution. That's going to happen anyway. Already fucking doing it. This is BS pushing me to say us versus them. I don't like that.
And secondly, it's what First Peoples requested in the Uluru Statement from the Heart. The starting point for reconciliation.
I should point something out as well. Look, just reading over this. The average life expectancy at the moment for Aboriginal males is 71.6, 75.6 for females. The median age of death in 2018 was 55.8 years in 2008. So the median age for the median death age at the moment is 60.2 years. So there's still quite a few of them dying young. Aboriginal people can expect to die about 8 to 9 years earlier than non-Aboriginal Australians. On average, they live to 71.6, 8.6 years less than their non-Aboriginal peers. Life expectancy is so low because Aboriginal health standards in Australia let 45% of Aboriginal men and 34% of women die before the age of 45. When considering life expectancy, remember that differs regionally. Life expectancy also varies between urban and very remote areas. In major cities, it's about 74 years. In remote areas, it's about 68 years. As life expectancy, comparing Aboriginal life expectancy is difficult.
Has to be listening to the wishes of Indigenous
I'm trying
people.
to find the pre-colonial.
The starting point cannot be a political fix made in Canberra.
It wasn't really kept
That's
track
not real
of, unfortunately.
reconciliation. Let me give you 3 examples of how the voice will work in a practical way. Practical, practical, practical. Let's say a local community identifies a problem like low school attendance. The community identifies that this is a challenge and wants to explore local solutions to improve school attendance. So the community approaches their representative on The Voice and raises this issue with them. The Voice then has the power to make representations on how to improve school attendance at the local community level to government and the Parliament. It's about linking up the local decisions.
None of that requires constitutional recognition. They could be doing that right now without it being constitutionally recognised. You could easily set up an advisory body that can have people go to them and say, hey, we have this issue. Can we make a representation to Parliament? Can we put in a submission? Nothing is... not.
Decision making and local knowledge with policymakers and government. Let me give you another area where I think The Voice can make an important practical difference. The Community Development Program, or the CDP. CDP was designed in 2015. It was meant to be an employment and training scheme that also contributed to remote communities. CDP supports around 40,000 people across 1,000 communities. In recent years, it's been a failure. It's been criticised for not being responsive to local communities and actually standing in the way of jobs and economic development, because one size does not fit all. It simply didn't work across 1,000 communities. Residents of remote communities have told me they want skills to work as mechanics and to run the local butcher or the bakery. But despite asking for this, despite wanting to work to improve their community, governments have failed to listen. I believe The Voice can play a key role in helping to fix CDP. To ensure that it's fit for purpose, we know that listening works. We know it delivers practical outcomes. Let's take another example, birthing on country. Aboriginal community-controlled health organisations have pioneered a more effective way of caring for mums and babies, one that embraces tradition and language so that mothers feel safe accessing medical services early and often, and by respecting and elevating the role of the extended family. Birthing on country has proven absolutely that there has been a 50% cut in babies being born early. Achieving this has been a real success. In the words of my friend Julian Lesser, The Voice can help us to understand better what's going on the ground and help ensure that better policy is made that's more responsive to community. Or to put it another way, doctors get better outcomes when they listen to patients. Bosses get better outcomes when they listen to workers. Policy makers get better outcomes when they listen to First Nations community. Much has been made of the proactive representations The Voice will make to Parliament and the government. Bringing the priorities to local communities to Canberra will be incredibly important. So will be the request government makes for the voice. With this, everyone, will be a step change in our ability to deliver evidence-based policy. Policy that is supported by community and makes a practical difference. From day one, the voice will have a very full in-tray. I will ask the voice to consider 4 main priority areas: health, education, jobs, and housing. The voice will be tasked with taking the long view. Unlike government, it will not be distracted by 3-year election cycles. It will plan for the next generation, not the next term. It will be focused on making a better future for the next generation. The time to make generational difference, everyone, is now. We live in an ageing country. Overall, less than a third of Australians are under 25. However, that rises to more than half for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. In the decades ahead, the cost and the consequence of repeating the same mistakes will be amplified. So too will the benefits if we listen and do things better. I want the voice to come up with fresh ideas that can guide us over the long term. As the Minister, when I meet for the first time with the voice, I will say, bring me your ideas on how we stop our people from taking their own lives. Bring me your ideas on how to help our kids go to school and thrive. Bring me your ideas on how to make sure our mob live healthy, happy lives. How we ensure more people have jobs with independence and purpose, and with the independence and purpose that brings. How we strengthen culture and language. How we support families better. How we keep alive 65,000 years of culture and make it stronger. I'll be asking the voice for their input to solve these most pressing issues, so there will be important work in the voice's in-tray from day one. It's not going to be a passive advisory body. I want it to be active. I want it to be engaged. We need new perspective to old challenges, perspectives that are connected to communities. We need ideas that come from the people on the ground. We need a voice. As my trailblazing sister, June Oscar, puts it, an Indigenous body gives us an opportunity to elevate our voices in a country where we occupy a space on the fringe of government policy. A voice gives us the ability to address Parliament directly through our connections to our communities and our regions. Now, I also want to say a few words about the No campaign.
Here we go.
The No campaign is being run by a group called Fair Australia. It is importing Trump-style politics to Australia.
Ooh, Trump man bad.
It is post-truth. And its aim is to polarise. Its aim is to sow division in our society by making false claims, including that providing advice to government would somehow impact the fundamental democratic principle of one vote, one value. A claim designed to mislead. My social media, as you can imagine, attracts trolls who accuse me of things like trying to set up an apartheid state. Last month, Pauline Hanson went on radio and said that she had met a true black. To think that this is unimaginably insulting and deserving of anything is really beyond the pale. Because what she was saying is that some Indigenous people are less deserving of our identity. To say it was an insult is an understatement. It was not called out by one media outfit. It was not written about by one media outfit. Do not let No campaign get away with using Trump-style politics in Australia. Do not let them divide us. Do not let them divide us. The proposed change is constitutionally sound and legally safe. I know it doesn't suit the narrative of the No campaign, but the Solicitor General, who was appointed by the now Shadow Attorney General, has given clear advice that recognition through the voice is not just compatible with the system of representative and responsible government, it will enhance it. The voice builds on well-established principles and practices and standards of accountability and transparency. It will help improve the quality of government spending, better programs and better outcomes. Friends?
Yep.
Friends, voting yes at this referendum will be a vote to unify and strengthen Australia. Voting yes will be an act of patriotism, an act of your belief in Australia. We are the greatest country in the world, and we can be even greater if we recognise Indigenous Australians. One of the best things about a modern Australia is that so many of us welcome those who come from across the sea to make a new life here. I see it in my own multicultural community of Barton. We rightly take great pride in welcoming waves of migration over the decades, and generation after generation of migrants have come to this country because they want a better life for themselves and their family. It is the great Australian story. But not everyone has enjoyed these same opportunities. Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people have not enjoyed those same opportunities. The gap is not closing. Disadvantage and discrimination persist. The good news is that later this year, we will all get the chance to do something better. Together, we can build a better future that recognises Indigenous Australians' rightful place in our country. A better future that genuinely listens to the needs and aspirations of Indigenous Australians. As the Prime Minister said at Garma last year, in years to come, we'll be able to measure the success of the voice, not just by the number of people who vote for the voice, but by the lives that the voice helps to change, the communities it empowers, the opportunities it creates, the justice it delivers, the security it will bring to First Nations people around our country. Friends, history is calling us. And I hope more than anything that the answer is yes. Yes to the Uluru Statement from the heart. Yes to a voice in Parliament. And yes to a better future. I want to conclude by quoting a passage from the Uluru Statement from the heart. Fortunately, we are the most incarcerated people on the planet. We are not an innately criminal people. Our children are alienated from our families at unprecedented rates. This cannot be because we have no love for them. Our youth languish in detention in obscene numbers. They should be our hope for the future. These dimensions of our crisis tell plainly the structural nature of our problem. This is the torment of our powerlessness. We seek constitutional reforms to empower our people to take a rightful place.
Oh, it's
in our
way
own
too late,
country.
Eliza.
When we
That's
have the
kind of why
power
we're here.
over our destiny, our children will flourish. They will walk in two worlds, and their culture will be a gift to this country. Friends, it is time. Nagali Yahagu, Baranjara, Manawal. Let's get this done together.
Okay, so that's her talking. Hopefully we might actually get some half-decent questions out of some journalists. Hopefully they're not all paid shills. But I did notice that some people came in late. Basically what this is all about is later on this year, Australians are going to the polls to whether or not to basically create a race divide in our constitution. Should one segment of society have a direct line to the legislature and the executive government when everybody else isn't?
If I could start...
doesn't have that sort of...
what should be a simple question.
Thank you.
A lot of white Australians don't actually have any experience of Indigenous communities. They remain an isolated and strange phenomenon. I was wondering whether you could just actually describe for our audience, you talk about these better health outcomes, for example. What would happen at the moment, just in a bureaucratic sense? What is the frustration of trying to get a better health outcome for Indigenous communities now? And secondly, you talked about how you as Minister would ask the Voice to consider health, education, jobs and housing. And I just wonder if you could tell us about how you would see the relationship with the Minister working. I presume you're not going to be instructing them to do that, you'd be asking them for that. And what sort of levels of advice? Obviously you've talked about the local community level, but would it be something where that you'd be hoping that the Voice could say these are the sort of trickle-down effects of state and federal governments, as well as what a particular individual community might need to get the outcome in that local community?
Thanks for that easy question, Laura. The history of the Voice has been a very long one, and it is not something that has just fallen out of thin air.
Let's see how she manages to craft whatever pre-thought out ideas she has to sort of twist it to make sense of the answer. Because I'm not going to lie, I can't even fucking remember what the question was.
I have worked in Aboriginal affairs for 44 years, and the relationship that I want to have with a Voice is a relationship based.
She said, I presume you're not going to be ordering them to do this, this, and that, and this, that, and the other. Well, as I said, my main issue with this is the legislation being able to make the government dictate what they want them to do, what forms, what functions, what powers they're going to have. If the legislation goes through that the government can delegate powers to them, they're of course going to be able to. How will the Voice do it? I got no clue. Non-answer, biased journalists like we have. I'll be interested to see. Ordinarily, the National Press Club, it's journalists from both sides. I'm hoping there's at least one journalist there that is from the no camp, so we can actually get something half decent.
On respect, based on a very proper way of doing things, and I would be asking the Voice and working with the Voice on how we would go about setting up that relationship. But the Voice, as I have said, is about two things. It's about bringing about those practical outcomes, and as Laura has indicated, I've identified the 4 priority areas that I have, and I'd be asking the Voice about that.
Oh yeah,
but the other thing,
lot of people are going to virtue signal
is that this goes to the first part of Laura's question. The Uluru Statement is an invitation from Aboriginal people to the rest of the country.
Just a reminder, guys, to hit the like and button, double check whether or not you're subscribed. Thank you to the 30 of you watching over on Rumble.
An invitation to start this trek across the nation with us. And one of the things that I am really, I have really noticed over the past few years, that there is an appetite for the truth in this country. There is an appetite from non-Indigenous Australians, whether they know an Indigenous person or not, to know the truth, to know where they fit. And the recognition part is about 65,000.
Okay, can I just say, bullshit! Everyday Australians that are stuck in the 9-to-5 rat race could not give a rat's flying fuck about what is going on in rural communities. Are you kidding me? I could walk down the street right now and ask 3 people, do you know what's going on in regional Australia? Do you know about the plights that are affecting the Indigenous Australians? What is an Aborigine? A Native Australian. Fucking word salad. A little bit, yeah. This is such a crock of shit. And it's infuriating me right at the second. Linda, your job as Minister for Indigenous Affairs is to be looking after these people. This, to me, is you bucking and handballing off your responsibilities, as far as I'm concerned. Mostly just pissed about how much of my taxpayer money they waste. Well, there is that too. No one in Canberra has a fucking clue. She's lying off her backside. Oh, for God's sake, tragic. I mean within the Australian context.
1,000 years. And that is the story of our country. It's not just my story. It's not just Ali Matilda's story. It's not just Anne Martin's story. It's not like just George Thompson's story. It is the story of this country. And that is why I'm saying this is so important in unifying it, because 65,000 years is unique on this blue planet and is something we all share.
Next question is from Jason Oakley.
Hello, Mr. Jason Oakley, NITV, representing Kalgoorlie, our voice correspondent. Thank you for your address today.
Okay, so fair and unbiased to begin with.
Yes.
I think I saw you last night, didn't I?
You did. Look, referendum are difficult, and historically, WA has been a difficult state to get positive results in a referendum, but is likely to be a critical state to win to get this referendum over the line. With the progress and local concerns of the state's modernisation of their cultural heritage legislation, are you concerned that this work will have a negative impact on the upcoming referendum? And what do you think needs to happen to get a positive result in WA?
Thank you so much for that question. Cultural heritage legislation is a state or territory responsibility, and I make that point very clearly. I am very...
So what the fuck's the point of having a federal body if the heritage stuff is at the state level? Way to torpedo your own ass!
Very pleased to see that Ken Wyatt has agreed to head up the council that will be dealing with that piece of legislation. I am going over to Western Australia on, I think it's Monday night. I'll be travelling from Albany right up to Port Hedland. And my aim for Western Australia, my personal aim, is to be an honorary Sandgroper by the end of this campaign.
Rosie Lewis.
I'm sorry, where was the answer to the question? He specifically asked, do you think that the modernisation of the heritage laws are going to undermine the voice referendum? Oh, yeah, no. That's a state issue that I'm not going to talk about, but I am going to go over to WA and basically say that I want to become like a fruit pickpacker or whatever else. What the fuck?
Minister, I wanted to try and clarify on your 4 priority areas. Will the voice be completely free to determine its own scope as per the constitutional amendment, or will you as minister expect it to advise on your 4 priority areas first and foremost? And will those areas be outlined in legislation establishing the voice?
That's a half-decent question. What do you got for us?
Last part of your question first. The legislation will be developed after extensive consultation both with the Aboriginal community and the broader community. And Rosie, I know that you're very familiar.
Wasn't there supposed to already be extensive, like, I thought the whole point of, the last 80 odd years that they've been going on about doing this, I thought that was supposed to be the consultation. And now you're saying, oh, we're going to have further consultation to make sure that the legislation that we don't want to give you any details about, but that we want you to vote on and allowing.
With that. Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people are worried about the big issues. As I said, I've been around for a very long time, and the issues of health, education, housing and employment are absolutely fundamental to the future direction for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. People are worried about their children's future, about education, about jobs, about medical services, and there hasn't been one community that I've visited that hasn't raised the issue of housing. Josie
Answer
Douglas,
the goddamn question.
Who is a wonderful Australian from the Central Land Council, put it best. The voice will be changing lives, not changing public holidays.
Karen Barlow.
Where the fuck was the answer to the question?
Hello, Karen.
Hello, thank you for your address. This week, the Canberra Times and the ACM dailies have published a readers' survey of 10,000 people, and it's a low yes result, 38%. In the regions, in particular, we've got papers in Tasmania and Central New South Wales. The result there was 35% yes. In Dubbo, 21%. This result was weighted against the national population, and it corresponds with national polls. What particular difficulties do you see with the regions? How do you talk to them? What do you say to the regions about the voice?
Oh, thank you for what is a really important point. Can I say this is my experience, and I have travelled extensively, and so have people like Marcus and Geraldine and many others in this room. When you have the conversations with people and they get to hear what's important about having a say on issues that affects them, it is very, very important. I am glad that people want more information. That makes me extremely hopeful. And
I'm sorry. Whoop, wrong button. Did you just say you're glad that people want more information about something you're forcing them to go to the polls to in less than 3 months? Did you actually just say that? This is something that will change the founding document of our country. And you are saying, oh, I don't have any of the answers. We're going to be doing consultation after the fact, but I'm glad that people want more information because that means that they're engaging with us. Are you fucking kidding me?
It's also extremely appropriate. We are some way out from the referendum, but what I can tell you, I have not caught a plane in the last few months without one or two people giving me a bit of a squeeze or a bit of a smile and a wink. I have not been to a...
What? I've not been on a plane without someone giving me a bit of a squeeze? Okay, Linda, firstly, that's a crime. You should have reported it to the AFP. But how is that irrelevant?
Supermarket without people approaching me. The fact that the business community, the union movement, the sporting codes, the faith groups, the civil society are supporting this, I believe, is the real measure of the level of support out there in the community. And people do want to know what some of the information is. But what the two fundamental points to walk away with today is this is about practical difference. This is about bringing about practical difference for what everyone agrees are totally unacceptable outcomes for First Peoples in this country. And secondly, it's about that recognition piece. And finally, there are some fantastic ways.
She just said it's two things. Oh, and by the way, it's firstly, secondly, and finally.
Websites. I've written this down. voice.gov.au. Have a look at it. Thank you.
She had to write down the words voice.gov.au. Again, you dodged around the question like you're playing dodgeball. Far as I'm concerned, some of those wrenches hit you in the forehead, though. Anecdotal experience is the real measure of the truth, apparently. Yeah.
Tom McElroy.
Hi, Tom.
G'day, Minister. Thank you for your speech and for taking our questions. You broke from your prepared remarks, or at least the released version, to criticise the campaign group Fair Australia today. That group has been taking out full-page ads in some newspapers and online, attacking high-profile business leaders supporting The Voice. Could I ask your reflections on that? And are your comments today a signal that you're going to take a more aggressive approach to what you call misinformation and division sowing?
Thank you, Tom, for that question. Look, it's up to Peter Dutton if he wants to tell people what to do. And I'm referring to his comments about the business community. Can I say that I met with...
That's the leader of the opposition. That's like a minister under Biden saying, oh, this issue is for Trump to sort out. I'm sorry, what? Just wanted to thank you. Without you, I would have to work way harder to find somewhere else to procrastinate. It is appreciated. You're very welcome, Tragic.
The business community yesterday. Their support
no, the video's
has
not
been
live.
Long held.
This was a week and a half ago.
It is not something that is new. It's the business community supports The Voice because they know that it is about employment. It is about making sure that people stay in jobs.
But it's not.
It is very much what they're driving through their businesses.
All of these things are things that your department could be working on.
Will be very impressed by the bully boy tactics of Peter Dutton.
Anna Henderson.
Wow, she was waiting to pull that one out.
Hello.
Hello. Thank you, Minister. Anna Henderson from SBS World News. You have really pulled no punches in your criticism of the No campaign, the opposition leader, and those groups which are campaigning against this referendum's success. Are you, though, concerned about how that impacts on those everyday Australians who are yet to make up their mind? Do you risk alienating them too?
The answer to that is...
Do we have an actual answer?
That as people come to understand what this voice is about, those two simple propositions.
But they can't understand what the voice is about because you're not actually telling them. There are people in the Yes campaign that can't even agree what the voice will be able to do.
Of recognition and of practical outcomes, they are the key points. People need to understand that misinformation and disinformation is damaging, and I do not apologise. I believe that the business community, as I said, is important. And I will continue to make sure that the misinformation and disinformation is understood. But you know what? I have every faith in the Australian community. I have so much faith in the Australian community from what I'm hearing and from what I'm seeing, that we are going to have a successful referendum.
Minister Code.
Hi, Minister. Thank you for your speech. Melissa Code from the Mandarin. I wanted to ask a question which spoke to both the sort of existential opportunity that the referendum offers us, but then also goes to these practical issues of delivering frank advice in partnership with First Nations community. And that was Australia's appetite and sophistication to truly hear uncomfortable things, because surely healing and the anger and hurt that also needs to be reckoned with is a part
Oh God,
of
no,
that
people
journey.
can't deal with hearing uncomfortable things.
The government has made it very clear that we support the Uluru Statement in full. There was a sequence in the Uluru Statement which we're also following. Voice, establishment of a Makarrata Commission that would have the responsibility for agreement making and a national process of truth-telling. This country is hungry for the truth. There are such amazing examples already in many communities of truth-telling. There are monuments to massacres. The Mile Creek Massacre is the good example, where the Mile Creek Massacre, I think, took place in 1823, but don't quote me on that. And the descendants of those that did the massacring and the descendants of those that were massacred have come together and built a monument and a walking path overlooking the site of the massacre. It is remarkable. And every long weekend in June, people go out and they recreate. And one of the beautiful things about it, everyone, is that you take something from your garden or something from your place, some sand, a rock, a leaf, and you place it on the monument, and that makes everyone involved. I'll tell you another story which I think is very important and goes very much to the first part of your question. People have made much to me about the lack of bipartisanship, but did you know something? This is about you. This is about you. It's not about me. Those of us that spend some time in that white place on the hill. This is about the conscience of the Australian people. This is about the heart and the soul of this nation. And
I can tell you right now, I have lived in the Northern Territory. I have lived in various parts of Australia. Right now, I can tell you, my conscience is fucking clear.
I went to a place called Flinders Island with Bridget Archer, who is, of course, a member of the coalition. And she took me to a place called Waibalina. I don't know if I've ever been as moved. And part of that story is that is where the Aboriginal people that were still alive, I think there were about 230 from mainland Tasmania, were put on Flinders Island. And only 40 survived. But some of the women used to climb to the top of the escarpment and they could see their home from the island. They could see Tasmania. And they stuck feathers to their arms, thinking they could fly home. Of course, they couldn't. But those stories are the story of this country, and there is a thirst for people to know them.
Britt Worthington.
Brett Worthington from ABC News. In 2019, you spoke at the National Farmers Federation and recalled your experience and Rick Farley's experience of bringing farmers and Indigenous communities together during the native title debates. I'm curious to what extent that's shaping the approach that you're bringing to the Voice campaign.
Thank you. I should give some people some context, I think. Do you want to? Okay, so Rick Farley was my husband. He died 16 years ago, and many of you knew him. He was a great Australian. And a lot of Rick's approach and philosophy rubbed off on me. Of course it did. And what I
don't want to hear about your husband rubbing off his
The
philosophy.
best way to get an outcome is through negotiation. It's about listening. It's about understanding that an outcome for everyone is important. I also learned from him that to have your feet firmly on the ground in this country was very important.
Trudy McIntosh.
Hello, Minister.
Wait, what? I don't know why I'm surprised at this point. She hasn't answered a single goddamn question that anyone has asked. If you never define what people are voting for, then whenever someone makes claims about it, you can just call it misinformation. This is true. Okay, we're almost done with this. There's less than 10 minutes left. My blood pressure's up as it is. This is some grade A bullshit, though. For anyone that's new or joining in, what we're talking about is the referendum to amend the Constitution of Australia so that Indigenous Australians have their own government body that has direct access to the executive government, to the legislature, and there's very specific wording in the proposed legislation that specifies that the government of the day will be able to give that body whatever forms, functions, or powers they want. I have a massive issue with that. You're expecting answers, no answers will be given. This is true. Descendant of Irish slaves, the victims are we all.
Hello. I'm sure everyone in this room would agree there's overwhelming support for constitutional recognition, but at this stage the same can't be said in terms of the public polling for the Voice. Jeff Kennett, the latest to call today for the questions to be split and that goes to the people. Are you open to that idea? And if not, does this risk setting back the chances of constitutional recognition for a generation?
The commitment from the government is very clear. The Constitution Alteration Bill has gone through both houses of Parliament. It outlines the question and it outlines the amendments for the Constitution. The Prime Minister has been extraordinarily clear, not since the last few months, but over a very long period of time, that we are doing what Aboriginal people have asked us to do, what Aboriginal people have said, and that is to enshrine a voice in the Constitution and to recognise the extraordinary history of this country. And that is very much the way we'll be moving forward.
Josh Butler.
Hi, Minister Josh Butler from The Guardian. To continue a theme on your thoughts on the No campaign, you've talked about misinformation, mental health organisations have talked about the impacts already seen on Indigenous people from this debate. Both campaigns are accusing the other of sowing division. Things are tense. Beyond the result of the vote itself, do you have concerns about ongoing fallout or effects from just having this debate? And whatever the results, there are very strong opinions on both sides. How do you pick up after the referendum and so heal whatever divisions have opened up through this debate?
I have a very deep commitment and a very deep view that Australians will rise to this. I have every faith. And when we think that it's going to be about practical outcomes and recognition, there is nothing to fear in what's being proposed. We are very
everything
conscious
to fear in what's being proposed.
of the issues around mental health and just where this debate could go. We've already seen some fairly unsavoury things. But I say these things to you, that the Yes campaign is going to be positive, it is going to be respectful, and it is going to be absolutely...
Whoa! That is horseshit, Linda! The Yes campaign came out swinging, calling people racist, or saying that it... Way to have a selective memory.
About the issues that affect First Nations people. It will not be about sowing division, I can assure you.
It's already sowing
$10 million
division.
Commitment in the last budget because of the issues that we understand could come. We have had long discussions with Equality Australia, who ran the marriage plebiscite, who are extremely skilled and understand what some of the implications are.
And unfortunately, that's the other thing as well that they're not taking into account. With everything that's going on, people are a little wary about even doing a plebiscite, let alone a referendum, because everyone's looking at exactly what's going on with the world and the issues that have stemmed from taking that step. Now, don't get me wrong, I'm very happy that gays have marriage. It doesn't affect me in the slightest. I couldn't really care less. People are still worried, though, because they've linked that in their mind to all sorts of shit that's going on in the current state of affairs. So, although it shouldn't have an impact on this, and it really shouldn't, I fully admit that, people are still going to be concerned. Just sent a Twitter DM with a good picture for you. Thank you. I'll have a look.
I have met with all the crisis lines, including 13 Yarn, Lifeline and many others, and that will be a continuing discussion. I have met with the E-Safety Commissioner about what is possible online and the way in which we will monitor that. So those things have been done proactively and will continue to be done.
Thank you. Jennifer Bishrati.
Yeah, Noddy, that's pretty much it.
In your view, what are the
That's
real
my view on it as
implications
well.
of a no vote? If people were to vote no.
My focus is that people will vote yes.
She cannot even fathom that there will be a no vote. My focus is that they're going to say yes. I don't care. I'm not even going to bother thinking about what happens and how I pick up the pieces when people vote no. Wait, did she just say what can be done online and monitor that? Oh, yes, Shothi, that's part of the misinformation, disinformation bill that we're going to be looking on later in the week. That's some scary shit. No, she cannot comprehend that there is a, she can't even comprehend that it may be a no vote.
Yes.
And if they vote no, what will happen?
Don't start fucking clapping to that and let her out of the question. I don't really give a shit if that's what she's focusing on. Answer the goddamn question! Sorry for your ears. I am sorry, Linda. You don't get to just dance around and answer like that. It was a point-blank question. What do you do when people vote no? Oh, I don't have to worry about it. People are going to vote yes anyway.
Do you believe?
I can only repeat what I've said. We are in the campaign for a yes vote, and that is where the focus is. That is where my belief is, and I believe that's where the Australian people are at.
Eliza.
Okay, and I believe that I should receive your salary. Let's make that a thing, okay? I will take your salary, potentially do your job, we'll see. But if I can just ignore reality because I believe such, wow, won't the world be an amazing place? I'm sorry, what? Hang on. Okay, that's not even funny, whoever decided to set up that bot in Rumble. That's not even remotely funny. Referendums make bad law. You can have the same referendum 10 times. It only needs to win once to fundamentally alter the law.
Edwards.
Hello.
Thanks, Minister. Hi. How soon will Australians find out when they'll head to the polls? And you might be loath to get into hypotheticals, but what happens to reconciliation if the referendum doesn't succeed? Would the Albanese government pursue any other path to reconciliation in this term of Parliament, like treaty negotiations? And as Minister, would you want to stay on in the portfolio?
There's 3 questions in that, so thank you.
I'm going to pick and choose which ones I can get around.
Address them. But thank you for your questions. There is much work to do in Aboriginal affairs, and I can only say to you that we are contemplating a successful referendum. The commitment to this referendum is full-throttled. The commitment to addressing the practical issues facing Indigenous people is absolute. The commitment to recognising First Peoples in the Constitution is absolutely 100%. So I am not going to deal in hypotheticals. My role as Minister is a role that I respect, is a role that I understand, and it is a role where I believe much good work can be done.
When will the date be set?
I am the wrong person to ask that question.
Apparently, you're the wrong person to ask any questions. And sorry, Jason, I missed that. In the last 100 years, what has the First Nation done for themselves to improve themselves without government? Jason, your guess is as good as mine. As bad as that sounds. As far as I'm aware, there hasn't been anything that they have done in terms of anything, really. I mean, we went through the history of it at the start of the show. We went through the Protection Acts, the boards, the things that were done in Australia to try and assist. Admittedly, there was some horrible shit that happened, and I wholeheartedly admit that, and I accept that. I'm not responsible for any of that. And no person still alive in Australia is responsible for anything that happened to the Indigenous Australians at this point in time, as far as I'm aware. That's not to say that, like, individual crimes haven't been committed, whatever the fuck else. You know what I'm saying. I'm not responsible for the attempted genocide of the Indigenous Australians, okay? Just saying. The trouble is that as soon as you take... They would have just as much opportunity as every other person born in Australia. That's the thing that really gives me the absolute fucking shits, is that they receive government housing, they receive government pensions, they receive whatever leg up and assistance they need, and yet we're still looking at a situation where not only do they want direct access to government because they want to do things their way to try and improve their situation, but I haven't seen any justifiable benefit to any of this either. And no, I don't think that they've pulled their bootstraps up, personally. I think there's a bunch of people that managed to make it through the system and do quite well for themselves. I mean, obviously, Linda, Taylor Reid, the lawyer that's one of the big proponents of The Voice, who we're going to discuss in a bit because I found a nice little Sky News article about her. So Taylor, nothing I say, or Taylor, nothing I say is going to be defamatory. It's purely just going to be reporting on news articles, okay? And in all seriousness, I'm not aware of anything that's changed in the last 100 years aside from people bitching and moaning and wanting government handouts. That's my own understanding on it. Just going to quickly check the chat. Just in case there was anything there. Did I cover Indigenous people who don't agree with The Voice? Yes, I did, Cakespoo. Yes, I did. Let me translate for her. We don't know what we're doing. Mayo is worse. He's a commie. Yep. Oh, there's that.
Our final question today is from Dan Jervis-Barty.
Dan Jervis-Barty from the West Australian.
Hello.
A big part of the Yes campaign has been to build grassroots support through conversations in the community, through kitchen table conversations, for instance. How do you go about connecting with people, particularly in sort of mortgage belt suburbs, who mightn't have time for kitchen table conversations? They don't have time to read the Karma Langton report. They mightn't have time to even read the newspaper or watch the news. They have other things on their mind. How do you intend to connect with people that mightn't have time to connect at all?
Well, the first thing I'd like to say, or the first 2 things I'd like to say, is the number one priority of this government is precisely what you've outlined. It's the cost of living, which was one of the reasons that we're so focused on bringing down the cost of childcare. We're so focused to making sure that paid parental leave is expanded, where there was a very sizable amount in the budget to ease cost of living pressures. But you know what? Governments can do two things at once. We can chew gum and we can walk. That is absolutely the case. The connection across mortgage belts, as you've described them, there are thousands of Australians out there doing things that you probably may not be aware of, that I'm not aware of. Things like door knocking, things like kitchen table conversations, things like forming local groups, things like organising events in libraries, things like producing material that's not endorsed by me, that's not endorsed by the government, but it suits those local communities. We have thousands of people out there taking the message out, and I can assure you, come referendum day, the message will truly be out there.
Ladies and gentlemen, please thank Linda Burney for it.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you for nothing. You dodged almost every question, provided nothing of substance, and just made me a little bit angry. So let's have a look at Sky News' response. I'm not usually a Peter Credlin fan, but this is what they had to say on that.
Of it then. But first, in a speech to the press club, you heard a little bit of it then. Earlier, of course, briefed out to all the main media papers, Indigenous Minister Linda Burney tried to reset the government's flailing Voice referendum campaign. In an attempt to counter the complete lack of hard detail about what the Voice would do and how the Voice would work, Burney told us what she wanted it to do. Now, it'd have to be asked, she said, to focus on health, education, employment and the housing issues of Indigenous Australians to lift their devastatingly poor life outcomes. Well, great. All of that.
Oh, son of a... Hang on. I've had that open the entire time, so I can kind of understand why they had an issue with it. I'll try and skip back to where she was talking.
To the press club would do and how the Voice would work, Burney told us what she wanted it to do. Now, it'd have to be asked, she said, to focus on health, education, employment and the housing issues of Indigenous Australians to lift their devastatingly poor life outcomes. Well, great. All of that's good, except the government has also said that the Voice is entirely independent of government. So it's pure subterfuge from Burney at the 11th hour to pretend that somehow she can in any way set the Voice's agenda. Now, we already have evidence.
Which is interesting because, as I said, given that the government of the day determines what powers it does or doesn't have, that kind of undermines the whole independent thing as well. It's literally, you do what we say or we legislate you out of existence, despite the fact that you are constitutionally enshrined.
That Burney can't dispute from activists pushing the Voice, like Professor Megan Davis, who said that the Voice couldn't be shut up. You can't shut the Voice up, says one of its architects. And even if, as a concession to the government, the Voice started on all those practical things Burney outlined today, it sure won't end there. It will swiftly get on to the main business of the Uluru Statement, which is, don't forget, treaty and the so-called Truth-Telling Commission. In other words, rewriting history, winding back the clock 200 years to restore a measure of sovereignty to so-called First Nations, with inevitably more controls and more expense over how the rest of us use our land, as we're seeing play out right now in WA's new Cultural Heritage Act. Now, I don't doubt Burney's desire to make a difference, but really, her speech raises far more questions than it answers.
As the minister,
no shit, you think?
When I meet for the first time with the Voice, I will say Bring me your ideas on how we stop our people from taking their own lives. Bring me your ideas on how to help our kids go to school and thrive.
You can do all this as Indigenous Minister. You don't need the voice to do that.
On how to make sure our mob live healthy, happy lives.
She's an Aboriginal woman who's been a professional parliamentarian, first in New South Wales, now in Canberra, for most of her adult life. But she doesn't have any ideas of her own, or even now she can't access ideas from elites that will end up forming this voice. And what makes her think that there's any magic new ideas out there anyway, just waiting for the voice to pick them up and run with them, rather than the unpopular but true reality that if we do want to get kids to thrive, as she says, we've got to get them to school. We've got to get them out of dysfunctional homes, away from substance abuse, sexual abuse and more. All the things we know now have been so far reluctant, gutless about tackling. Today, Bernie didn't have an answer as to why Indigenous Australians need this new, unique and special voice of their own. Yet all the other groups that also might be disadvantaged, migrants, old people, people with a disability, all of whom are arguably less represented in the parliament, don't need their own voice. And I think we know what all of these new ideas will inevitably involve. More taxpayer money, more layers of bureaucracy. And yet, despite the billions and billions, no better accountability for how...
Hang on. The issue is people call that an attack on their culture and claim it's not fair because of how they were treated and they should be able to live how they want under their own rules. I've talked to Aboriginals that think once the yes vote wins, they will get reparations and won't have to look for work or hassle with Centrelink ever again. Well, we're going to get to that too.
How your money's spent. No one out of this voice, if it gets up, are going to take responsibility for what they advise, what works and what doesn't. But there was one really strange aspect to her speech.
One?
It will not be distracted by 3-year election cycles. It will plan for the next generation, not the next term.
Right, hang on. What does that mean? That members of the voice won't regularly be replaced? Now, we still don't know how they're going to be chosen. The PM says they'll be elected.
As you've acknowledged, people want to understand this, right? So I'm giving you the opportunity to give that clarity.
That voice to Parliament elects people to the national voice structure.
But that's not right. His own voice website says they'll be selected, not elected. But however they get there, what does Bernie's new statement today mean? That the voice won't be distracted, she says, by electoral cycles. Does that mean they'll be there longer than 3 years?
Effectively.
5 years perhaps, 10 years, maybe for life? Or that regardless of what any political party might put up as Indigenous policy at the election, the voice will do what it likes anyway. With polls turning, this is just getting worse and worse for the government. And Bernie's heavy on emotion but light on detail speech today hasn't answered the questions that more and more reasonable Australians are asking. And look, her personal attacks, they do nothing to aid her argument either.
Do not let no campaign get away with using Trump-style politics in Australia. Its aim is to polarise. Its aim is to sow division in our society by making false claims.
There's a reality in politics, you know, the more shrill you get, the more your argument is falling apart.
So there you go. All right, very quickly. One of the architects, so Mayo's not great. Got a thing here on Talia Reid. Admittedly, again, we're back to Sky News because they seem to be the only people actually talking about the voice in any sort of negative light that I can find, really. But then we've got this.
Yes, this is from the Daily Telegraph. James Campbell reports that one of Anthony Albanese's members of his referendum engagement group is not only describing Australia as a nation without a soul, but Teela Reid, who's also a lawyer and academic, is saying this is going to be the first step, the voice, in redistributing power. And that's a direct quote, the first step in redistributing power. So they're starting to say the quiet bits out loud.
They're telling the truth, James.
And that's where people who are a little undecided about the voice, the more they hear these kinds of comments, that undecided vote will start.
Damn it. Hang on. User.com.au is not liking me today. Come on, you can do it. You can do it.
Well, yes, this is from the Daily Telegraph engagement group, is not only describing Australia as a nation without a soul, but Teela Reid, who's also a lawyer and academic, is saying this is going to be the first step, the voice, in redistributing power. And that's a direct quote, the first step in redistributing power. So they're starting to say the quiet bits out loud.
They're telling the truth, James.
And that's where people who are a little undecided about the voice, the more they hear these kinds of comments, that undecided vote will start to move towards no. No doubt about it.
I think most of that undecided vote is a shy no vote already. They're just reluctant to say it because of the way the no vote has been characterised by the yes camp as racist and cruel. But you might remember Teela Reid from the ABC's coronation coverage. She said some fairly remarkable things on that we covered on this program, and she's speaking out again.
No, but at least, look, I prefer them being honest about what they have in mind for us. We should all know, go into this vote, this referendum, with our eyes wide open. And it's people like Lydia Thorpe or this individual who are actually telling you what the game is.
This academic is on the Prime Minister's
yes.
And the whole thing is that Albo
group
has spoken out of both sides of his mouth all the way through this. The Labor Party are telling the activists that it's going to be powerful, it's going to do all these things, it's going to change power in this country, and they're trying to reassure the people who it will affect most if they change the referendum, and that is they're telling the rest of us,
recognition.
It's a minor
if they get some sort of power through the voice, I mean, on the coronation broadcast, she famously called for an abolition of prisons.
Yes, she
as
did.
a wonderful Indigenous policy.
Yes, because apparently, again, as we saw with Marcia Langton, the extremist claims about what goes, the damage being done to Indigenous Australians always ignores or refuses to accept the many, many benefits that have come through the process of bringing one nation into the modern world. It's extraordinary.
So there you go. All right, guys. So the long and the short of it is, I've already made my position on this very clear. Is that I don't believe that the way that the voice legislation has been set up is appropriate. I don't think that it's... I believe that it's disingenuous. I think that it is effectively setting something up to do not what they're saying that it's going to do. But the fact that they're actually not saying what it's going to do anyway is a real issue. The fact that they're saying, vote for it now, we'll hammer out the details later. That's not how business works. That's not how anything in life should ever work. If you do that, it's significantly dangerous, okay? Having a constitutionally recognised voice, okay, fine. Clause 1, sure, there'll be a voice. Clause 2, sure. Clause 3, the fact that the Parliament of the day can delegate to this voice whatever powers they want, in the form of ability to have functions and powers, give rules, regulations, all that sort of stuff, that's a big-ass no from me. I want to know exactly what every aspect of government is able to do, and this is a complete lack of transparency, and it's effectively giving a race-based advocacy group a red phone to the government. I'm not okay with that. I will never be okay with that. More ways to... There were more questions than answers. Cannot vote yes on this. No, absolutely not. no from me. And look, I personally will be voting no. I've read the proposed legislation. The question itself is disingenuously racist. And as far as I'm concerned, everything that they're proposing would be able to be fixed under the voice could be done without the requirement for an additional taxpayer-funded, effectively government department. But as always, people, do your own research. I implore you, do your own research, come to your own conclusions, and decide which ballot box you're going to be ticking when it comes time in sometime between October and December. I'm assuming around the middle of November. So, but hopefully you've enjoyed the a little bit more structured content. I'm going to try not to be quite so dry, shall we say, going forward. But this one, there wasn't a lot to work with in terms of comedy, because let's face it, any way that I took this and made a joke out of it was never going to end well. So, but as always, guys, I'm Aussie Overlaw'd. Please remember, you are not a piece of shit. You do have value and you do contribute to society. Even if all you do is really double check whether or not you've hit that like button. Double check whether or not you're subscribed. Change the bell from personalised to all to make sure that you are keeping an eye on things. And also, just so you are aware, tonight, around 5 o'clock my time, so for most of you people in America, it'll be long after your bedtime, but I'm going to be doing an after-party show once Nick finishes over on Rumble. So, if you're part of that group, fabulous! I'll see you then. Otherwise, you can catch it on the replay. But as always, guys, love you all. Stay healthy, wealthy, and wise, and I'll catch you on the flip side. Cheers, guys. And, of course, I've lost the video. Of course I have.
This shit, I'm out. Fuck this shit, I'm out. No thanks. Don't mind me. I'ma just grab my stuff and leave. Excuse me, please. Fuck this shit, I'm out. Nope. Fuck this shit, I'm out. Alright then. I don't know what the fuck just happened, but I don't really care. I'ma get the fuck up out of here. Fuck this shit, I'm out.